Hello there friends, my name is Rachel G&S Middle. Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name, and my middle name is my last name. And I am here on behalf of Forbear Theatre to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas by very pedantically ranking every element of them. And today we are looking at the Yeomen of the Guard dialogue. If you listen very carefully, you might be able to hear my boyfriend practicing Ruddigore. So these are the parameters that I've used to judge these scenes. I've given them all out of 10 marks: poetry, comedy, character, and just to clarify, because I think some character seems to kind of mean a different thing whenever I judge it. But in this occasion, I'm judging how well the lines written reflect the characters, or how vivid the characters are from the lines that Gilbert has written for them. You'll often find that people argue about Jack Point, for example. Not just Jack Point, not just Jack Point by any means. And people will say, oh, but Jack Point's an awful guy, as evidenced by the text, or no, Jack Point's just a misunderstood guy, as proved by the text. Because the thing is, this text is actually so vague that you can use it to produce many different scenarios, many different characterizations of Jack Point. And that is why I actually found it quite difficult to play him in these scene readings. I don't practice my lines. So the lines that I read well are usually the parts that I've done. So like Phoebe's lines I think I did pretty well on, Elsie's lines I did pretty well, and I've played both of those parts. But Jack Point, I've never played any of the traditionally male parts in this show, and I did not practice them or even really think about them. I like to see what comes out. And I quite like my Wilfred, actually. I thought I did a pretty decent job with Wilfred. But yeah, Jack Point, I was very inconsistent from scene to scene. He's a hard part, I think, to play. I'd often thought, oh, he'll be one that will just fall out of me because of the way I connect with him as a character. He's this tortured comedian who's extremely insecure and is not good at talking to people he has feelings for, who uses humour as a defence to hide what he's feeling. And I thought, hey, that's me in a nutshell. Maybe that's why I find it difficult. Maybe it's a bit too close to me. I don't know. But I found him quite difficult. But I do also think that these lines are not as skillfully written for the characters as the lines in the Mikado were. I'll go into more detail about that as we go through each scene. I've also given a mark out of 10 for narrative, so that's not only how much story, how much exposition is given in scenes, how valuable that is for us as an audience to understand the story, but also just how well it's written. And so if something seems shoehorned in or sudden, then it'll lose marks for narrative rather than gain them, because even though it is narrative, it's delivered badly. The reason that the Mikado narrative is delivered so well is because it's done so snappily and easily. But in Yeomen, I find that a lot of the scenes, even right up until halfway through the second act, are delivering exposition. And that is not good. You shouldn't be doing exposition halfway through the second act. But there's so much to explain in this story. And the characters, especially Sergeant Merrill, have a really rough time having to explain all of the things that are going on in this show. Emotional / dramatic impact, I also marked out of 10. I expected this to be a very emotional one, but then after looking at the dialogue, it does seem like a lot of the emotion is in the songs themselves and not necessarily in the dialogue, but there certainly is quite a bit of emotion. And we'll get into that. Mistress Merrill.
Eh? Oh, it's you, is it? Well, you may go away if you like, because I don't want you, you know.
Haven't you anything to say to me?
Oh, yes. Are the birds all caged? The wild beasts all littered down? All the locks, chains, bolts and bars in good order? Is the little ease sufficiently uncomfortable? The racks, pincers and thumb screws all ready for work? Ugh, you brute.
These allusions to my professional duties are in doubtful taste. I didn't become a head jailer because I like head jailing. I didn't become an assistant tormentor because I like assistant tormenting. We can't all be sorcerers, you know.
Ah,
You brought that on yourself.
Colonel Fairfax is not a sorcerer. He is a man of science and an alchemist.
Well, whatever he is, he won't be one for long, for he's to be beheaded today for dealings with the devil. His master nearly had him last night when the fire broke out in the Beauchamp Tower.
How I wish he'd escaped in the confusion. But take care. There's still time for a reply to his petition for mercy.
I'm content to chance that. This evening, at 7:30.
You're a cruel monster to speak so unfeelingly at the death of a young and handsome soldier.
Young and handsome? How do you know he's young and handsome?
Because I've seen him every day for weeks past taking his exercise on the Beauchamp Tower.
Curse him.
There! I believe you're jealous of him now. Jealous of a man I've never spoken to. Jealous of a poor soul who's to die in an hour.
I am. I'm jealous of everybody and everything. I'm jealous of the very words I speak to you, because they reach your ears and I mustn't go near 'em.
How unjust you are! Jealous of the words you speak to me! Why, you know as well as I do that I don't even like 'em.
You used to like 'em.
I used to pretend I liked them. It was mere politeness to comparative strangers.
I don't believe you know what jealousy is. I don't believe you know how it eats into a man's heart and disorders his digestion and turns his interior into boiling lead. Oh, you are a heartless jade to trifle with the delicate organisation of the human interior. So I find it so hard to believe that anyone watching this thinks that Wilfred and Phoebe have a truly toxic relationship. Aline and Alexis, they have a toxic relationship because they don't communicate. In fact, Wilfred and Phoebe, even though they're bickering with each other, and, you know, let's take Phoebe at her word, let's believe her and imagine that she doesn't fancy him, but she certainly feels free to communicate with him. She's not afraid of him. And I think this is what a lot of people get wrong in a way. They say, oh, Wilfred's a brute, he's horrible to Phoebe. And I was like, well, no, in fact, like, Wilfred, if anything, is, you know, he's a few sandwiches short of a picnic. He's not the best with his words. Having said that, though, I absolutely love the poetry in this scene. When he says, I'm jealous of the very words I speak to you because they reach your ears, but I mustn't go near them. I think that is beautiful. I think that's more beautiful than anything Jack Point says, personally, in this whole show. I think that's really, really lovely. And yes, they're clearly not right for each other right at this moment. Phoebe is still lusting after somebody else, but she's young, she's immature. He is young, he's immature. They've not really quite worked it out yet, but I think they are secretly, well, not on his side, but she is secretly very fond of him. I think that if she truly was disgusted by him, she wouldn't be so open with what she's saying to him. I think that there is some love there, but it's more of a kind of impatient brother-sister relationship than it is anything truly toxic. And so when people say, well, it ended really unhappily for Phoebe at the end of Yeomen, I don't tend to believe them, because even though, yeah, she might not have imagined marrying him, but I think she and Wilfred are going to be a lot happier than a lot of marriages were in those days, and even today. Because, like, they are truly not scared to tell each other what they feel. And that, I think, is the basis of a really, really happy relationship. And lest we forget, a lot of marriages those days weren't really based on love anyway. So, yeah, well, if two people had this relationship today, I'd probably suggest, yeah, like, Wilfred, maybe just go to Europe for a year and you may contrive to forget her. And then come back and just be friends. But, you know, certainly back in Tudor times, if two people had this relationship, I could have thought, hey, you'd make quite a good couple, really. I think that would be very sweet. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and give this an 8 out of 10 for poetry, just because of that lovely line that Wilfred said. I think that's definitely worth it for that. And it's got so many funny moments in it as well. I think I'm also going to give it an 8 out of 10 for comedy. Character, yeah, this one really aces character. I'm actually going to give it a 10 out of 10 for character. Phoebe and Wilfred are so vivid in this scene. It is one of my favourite introduction scenes of characters. Much like the Captain and Josephine in HMS Pinafore, it does such a good job of informing us who the characters are. Narrative as well, it does a great job. It does that thing I'm always talking about, where not only does it give us lots of the story, it does so in a way that we can emotionally connect to, because Phoebe doesn't want Fairfax to die, and Wilfred kind of does want Fairfax to die. But you know what? I don't know if he'd truly be happy if he did die. I think he's just razzing her. I'm going to give it a 9 for narrative. I think a lot of it is more character based than narrative based. Emotional dramatic impact. I wouldn't say that it's hugely emotional dramatic. I'm going to give it a 7 for that. I do really like this scene. I venture to say that it is going to be one of my favourite scenes. I don't think this opera maybe has the best dialogue scenes compared to some of the others, but remember, we have just come from doing Mikado and Patience and Iolanthe, all which have such good dialogue. So when we're getting to this one, it maybe does feel like Gilbert wasn't at his best, but still a really lovely scene, a great way to start.
A good day to you. Good day, Dame Carruthers. Busy today? Busy, aye. The fire in the Beecham last night has given me work enough. 12 poor prisoners, Richard Colfax, Sir Martin Byfleet, Colonel Fairfax, Warren the Preacher Poet, and half a score others, all packed into one small cell not 6 feet square. Poor Colonel Fairfax, who's to die today, is to be removed to number 14 in the Cold Harbour, that he may have his last hour alone with his confessor, and I've to see to that. Poor gentleman, he'll die bravely. I fought under him 2 years since, and he valued his life as if it were a feather. He's the bravest, the handsomest, and the best young gentleman in England. He twice saved my father's life, and it's a cruel thing, a wicked thing, and a barbarous thing that so gallant a hero should lose his head, for it's the handsomest head in England. For dealing with the devil? Aye, if all beheaded who dealt with him, there'd be busy doings on Tower Green. You know very well that Colonel Fairfax is a student of alchemy, nothing more and nothing less. But this wicked tower, like a cruel giant in a fairy tale, must be fed with blood. And that blood must be the best and the bravest in England, or it's not good enough for the old blunderbore. Ugh! Silence, you silly girl, you know not what you say. I was born in the old keep, and I've grown grey in it, and, please God, I shall die and be buried in it. And there's not a stone in its walls that is not as dear to me as my own right hand.
So, how do we feel about this scene? Dame Carruthers seems to me to be a bit of a stick in the mud. I think when your character trait is that you love the building that you live in, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of Dame Carruthers. I know other people have told me, oh, they love Gallant Norman Foes, they love Dame Carruthers, they find her so funny. I'm afraid she leaves me totally cold. I do not see the attraction in playing Dame Carruthers. She's one of these parts that I have absolutely zero desire of ever playing. Maybe you can convince me otherwise, but there's nothing in her that I admire or find interesting. And thus far, she showed us no vulnerabilities, apart from being very easily triggered when people insult the building that she lives in. I do think this scene does well in giving us a bit more narrative, so yeah, that's ticking along. Maybe not quite as effectively as the last scene, because it's more just, oh, what are you doing, Dame Carruthers? Yes, I'm doing this. So it's a little bit less easy and casual than it was in the first scene. So I'm going to give it a 7. I think it does a fair enough job, but no more than that. So character, yeah, Phoebe is still being Phoebe. She's reminding us that Fairfax is a brave guy and everyone loves brave men in this opera. That's a bit of a theme. If only there had been a way of writing this scene in a way that showed us that Dame Carruthers loved Merrill and was after him. that doesn't really seem like it would have been too hard. Maybe just put a couple of little bits in here and there, just to make it less of a shock when Dame Carruthers suddenly is in love with Meryl in Act 2. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to give her a 6 for character. Well, no, I'll give it a 7. Because we have established that Dame Carruthers really likes the tower. She's certainly very principled, very strong. She has no problem confronting Phoebe Merrill, who is her crush's daughter, and who is, a relatively senior woman, I guess, in the Tower of London, if she's the daughter of the head of the Tower of Warders. Of the Tower of Warders? Phoebe is the daughter of the head of the Yeomen of the Guard. So, she is strong-willed, she's very busy, she seems to be a bit of a battle axe, for want of a better word. Like, oh yes, I'm very busy, I'm a very busy woman, and I don't know, I'm not inspired by her, but I'm still going to get a 7 for character. Is this scene in the least bit funny? I guess just the fact that Dame Carruthers tells her silence and Phoebe says it's the handsomest head in England. Ha ha ha. I mean, if zero comedy is 0, then this gets the 3. I'm not going to mince words. It's not great. But poetry, I would also give it a relatively high score. I don't think it's quite as nice as Wilfred's line, but I'm going to give it a 7. That this cruel tower, this wicked tower, like a cruel giant in a fairy tale, must be fed with blood. That's pretty cool. I quite like that line. It's a little bit cringe. It's a little bit too dramatic to have been earned at this point, I think. And its emotional dramatic impact, I do think, suffers slightly as a result. I could only truly give that a 6, because I don't really believe them. I don't really think that anyone is going to watch this and truly be moved by Dame Carruthers' speech about the tower. I was born here and I will die in it. Are people moved by that? Maybe I should give that a 7 instead of a 6, but I'm going to give it a 6 because personally for me, and remember these are subjective, I'm not the arbiter of all things Gilbert and Sullivan, even though that is my middle name. So that is my subjective mark for it, because I just don't really find this emotional. But hey, a 6 is I'm still appreciative of the fact that there is still kind of emotion going on. It's just not anything that I really connect to, and I do think it is a bit of being dramatic for the sake of being dramatic.
Father, has no reprieve arrived for the poor gentleman? No, my lass, but there's one hope yet. Thy brother Leonard, who, as a reward for his valour in saving his standard and cutting his way through 50 foes who would have hanged him, has been appointed a yeoman of the guard, will arrive today. And as he comes straight from Windsor, where the court is, it may be that he will bring the expected reprieve with him. Oh, that he may. Amen to that. For the colonel twice saved my life, and I'd give the rest of my life to save his. And wilt thou not be glad to welcome thy brave brother, with the fame of whose exploits all England is a-ringing? Ay, truly. If he brings the reprieve. And not otherwise. Well, he's a brave fellow indeed, and I love brave men. All brave men? Most of them, I verily believe. But I hope Leonard will not be too strict with me. They say he is a very dragon of virtue and circumspection. Now, my dear old father is kindness itself, and leaves thee pretty well to thine own ways, eh? Well, I've no fears for thee. Thou hast a feather brain, but thou'rt a good lass. Yes, that's all very well. But if Leonard is going to tell me that I may not do this, and I may not do that, and I must not talk to this one or walk with that one, but must go through the world with my lips pursed up and my eyes cast down like a poor nun who has renounced mankind, why, as I have not renounced mankind, and I don't mean to renounce mankind, I won't have it. There. Nay, he'll not check thee more than is good for thee, Phoebe. He's a brave fellow, and bravest among brave fellows, and yet it seems but yesterday that he robbed the lieutenant's orchard. I'm still laughing about the fact that there's a whole song about Meryl's relationship with his son, when we barely even see his son. But yeah, there's that. So, for a start,
This scene has that famous line in which I'm gonna tell the little tiny story again, where the guy playing Merrill in my most recent production of Yeomen of the Guard, I hadn't actually met this guy because he just auditioned for me over video, and he was actually the youngest person in my cast, which was quite funny. He emailed me saying, Rachel, how on earth do I say this line? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. So I did my best just there. But that truly is a very difficult line to say about cutting his way through 50 photos. I think a lot of Merrill struggle with that. I feel like Merrill is a narrative device more than he is a character, but you do get quite a bit more of Phoebe's character come through here. We learn that it's not just Fairfax that she loves most brave men, which I do think is a very funny line. So for me, I'm going to give that an 8 for character, and I'm also going to give it a gentle 7 for comedy. I do think that Phoebe is very funny in this scene, especially with her speech about, but I must not talk with this one or walk with that one, and I do really admire that as well. It's lovely to hear a woman talk like that, especially in those days. But it is amazing. I would be interested to know if as many men who typically do directing jobs or acting jobs or in any position of power, if they get given friendly advice and told what to do, and they go, you shouldn't do that, Rach, you shouldn't do that, or I think you should have done that, or like, you know, embarrassing me in front of my whole casts when they stop the rehearsal to ask me why I've made a certain decision or ask me why I'm doing something. I wonder if men get that. It is very cathartic to hear a woman with these lines, especially these are written in Victorian times, which to me it's very refreshing. It's nice to think that Gilbert was creating these characters, and you know, I do think he's belittling her a little bit, but she's also so fun, and I don't think she's put down all that much. Yeah, thou art a featherbrain, but you're a featherbrain, but thou art a good lass. But yeah, I actually think that she seems pretty clever to me. Yeah, she's a total lovesick teenager, and Fairfax is completely wrong for her, just in every way. But I actually think she's quite bright, and she speaks well. And so I love Phoebe as a character. I think she's an awesome character. I had a great time playing her. It would have been nice to have played her again. Oh well. I've no idea why my boyfriend's listening to Tight Little Craft. I wonder if he knows he's not in there. Poetry, yes. So I'm just going to go and give this a 6 out of 10. I would have given it a 7 because I think Phoebe does have that lovely line, but then Merrill has that terrible line. So I've split the difference and given it a 6. Narrative. Is there much narrative in this scene? Not particularly. We're learning that the reprieve hasn't arrived, but it might. But really, there's not too much. We're just talking about her feelings for her brother and his values. So I'm just going to give narrative a 6. And emotional and dramatic impact, there's not really much at all. In fact, this scene is relatively emotionally underwhelming, so I'm going to give that one a 4.
Father! Leonard, my brave boy, I'm right glad to see thee, and so is Phoebe. Aye, hast thou brought Colonel Fairfax's reprieve? Nay, I have here a dispatch for the lieutenant, but no reprieve for the colonel. Poor gentleman, poor gentleman. I would I had brought better news. I'd give my right hand, nay, my body, my life to save his. Dost thou speak in earnest, my lad? Aye, father. I'm no braggart. Did he not save thy life, and am I not his foster brother? Then hearken to me. Thou hast come to join the Yeomen of the Guard? Well, none has seen thee but ourselves, and a sentry who took but scant notice of me. Now to prove thy words. Give me the dispatch, and get thee hence at once. Here is money, and I'll send thee more. Lie hidden for a space and let no one know. I'll convey a suit of yeoman's uniform to the colonel's cell. He shall shave off his beard so that none shall know him, and I'll own him as my son, the brave Leonard Merrill, who saved his flag and cut his way through 50 foes who thirsted for his life. He will be welcomed without question by my brother Yeoman, I'll warrant that. Now, how to get access to the colonel's cell? The key is with thy sour-faced admirer, Wilfred Shadbolt. I think I can get anything I want from Wilfred. I think Mind, I say, I think. You may leave that to me. Then get thee hence at once, lad, and bless thee for this sacrifice. And take my blessing too, dear, dear Leonard. And thine, eh? Thy love is new born. Wrap it up carefully, lest it take cold and die.
Now, I do find this scene kind of funny, but for all the wrong reasons. I don't think it's a bad scene. I don't think it's particularly badly written. It's just a lot. You just, whoa, okay, that is a lot of information to take in about what's going on. Sergeant Merrill has obviously come up with this plan already. Like, right, here's what we'll do. You go away, I'll send you money, we're gonna convey a thing of Yeoman's uniform to the Colonel's cell, he'll put the uniform on, he'll shave off his beard so that none shall know. It's a little bit like Clark Kent and Superman in the New Adventures of Superman, how Lois Lane doesn't recognise him. Even though she's just not wearing his glasses. Now, funnily enough, I probably wouldn't recognise somebody if they shaved off their beard, but I'm terrible with faces. But most people, I think, probably would recognise a person if they didn't have their beard. And it just seems, the whole situation is so bizarre. It's such a risk, and it's just, this is something that Will noticed as well, how none have seen me but ourselves, and a sentry who took but scant notice of me. It seems like Gilbert had to put that in because it would be completely unrealistic that nobody saw him. And I just imagine Leonard just walking straight into the Tower of London and this guy just in the sentry box just goes, I don't know. Was he not checked in? Is there no security at the Tower of London? This guy just walked right in. So he just got a sleepy sentinel, I guess. He's the sleepy sentinel that they refer to later. This sentry, wow, imagine if the thing is, again, this is quite a risk. Because imagine if the sentry had just totally seen him. And we're just saying, no, in the outward finale, you're not Leonard Merrill. It's such a risk, and the fact that Merrill is just so sure this plan's going to work. But we're in an opera. It's topsy-turvy. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. I'm just explaining why I find it quite funny. And it's just not really going to affect the marks. Poetry. This is not particularly beautiful language. I'm going to give it a 5. I think that's fair for this scene. Comedy. As I say, I find it quite funny. But there's no actual jokes in this scene. I think the thing that Leonard says to Phoebe is meant to be really funny, but I don't really get it. Maybe somebody can explain that to me. Thy love is newborn, wrap it up cold lest it die. I know I paraphrased there. But maybe somebody can explain to me why that line is funny. And careful, because if it is funny because of sexism, I'm going to shoot the messenger and blame you for telling me. Or because if you admit that you find it funny and it's a sexist joke, I'm not going to be happy about that. So if you want to, if you also want to point out that that is the joke, but that you don't personally find it funny, that's okay. You can then tell me. But however you slice it, I don't think this is a funny joke, and I'm gonna go and give it a 4 for comedy. Just because I think that I like the energy of this scene. There's something funny about the energy of it. Character. We know nothing about Leonard. He'd die for Fairfax, so would Merrill. Phoebe would also like Fairfax to live. Do we learn much about their characters? Not really. I'm gonna give this. I'm gonna give it a 5 as well. I'm not gonna be too cruel. Narrative, though. Yeah, we are learning a lot, but is it a bit too much? I do feel like we're a little bit overwhelmed by the amount that Merrill is saying, and it seems not very realistic that it'll work. And also, even at this stage, I'm already getting quite fatigued with the sheer amount of exposition and narrative that's going on. If you think about HMS Pinafore, the main heart of that story is explained in 3 sentences, and this, they're still going with that exposition, so it's a lot. So I'm going to give it an 8 because it does impart quite a lot of narrative and the whole plan is devised in this scene. But I've dropped a couple of points just to express how long this is taking to get the story across. Emotional dramatic impact, yeah, I guess it's quite an exciting plan, but it's fear rather than any kind of like true deep emotion that we can connect with. Or like not even fear, just anxiety. I love the song. I love Alas I Waver To and Fro. But I'm just going to give it a 6 for emotional / dramatic impact. I think that's a fair enough mark for this scene.
Nay, lass, be of good cheer, we may save him yet. Oh, see, father, they bring the poor gentleman from the Beecham. Oh, father, his hour is not yet come. No, they lead him to the Cold Harbour Tower to await his end in solitude. But softly, the lieutenant approaches. He should not see thee weep. Halt! Colonel Fairfax, my old friend, we meet but sadly. Sir, I greet you with all goodwill, and I thank you for the zealous care with which you have guarded me from the pestilent dangers which threaten human life outside. In this happy little community, death, when he comes, does so in punctual and business-like fashion, and, like a courtly gentleman, giveth due notice of his advent, that one may not be taken unawares. Sir, you bear this bravely, as a brave man should. Why, sir, it is no light boon to die swiftly and surely at a given hour and in a given fashion. Truth to tell, I would gladly have my life, but if that may not be, I have the next best thing to it, which is death. Believe me, sir, my lot is not so much amiss. Father, I cannot bear it. My poor lass. Nay, pretty one, why weepest thou? Come, be comforted. Such a life as mine is not worth weeping for. Sergeant Merrill, is it not? May I greet my old friend? Why, man, what's all this? Thou and I have faced the grim old king a dozen times, and never has his majesty come to me in such goodly fashion. Keep a stout heart, good fellow. We are soldiers, and we know how to die, thou and I. Take my word for it. It is easier to die well than to live well, for, in sooth, I have tried both.
So I feel like after doing this dialogue, I have done a bit of an about turn about Fairfax. That's slightly disingenuous, because I think the about turn probably was actually very slow, and it started to happen about 2 years ago up until this point. I used to think, oh, Fairfax is such a bad guy. And I maintain that he does say some quite unpleasant things later and do some quite unpleasant things. I don't like the way he manipulates Elsie. I don't like what he says to Jack Point and how he disregards his feelings. However, I think there's a lot to admire about him. I really like his outlook on life, and Is Life a Boon is just one of the greatest tenor arias ever, in my opinion. But the poetry in this scene and the nobility with which he expresses it, he has such grace and such kindness and consideration for those around him. And that may be an act. He may be an evil narcissist. That's the great thing about Fairfax. You really can make this character whatever you want to make him. You can play him as being actually very genuinely nice and just, he's a little bit cheeky. You could spin him like that, or you can spin him as being a kind of mastermind narcissist. You can really make him whatever you want to make him, and for that I think he's a really interesting, good character. And this scene, I think, does him a lot of favours. You really get a feel for him in this scene. I don't think it's like an overly long scene, and we don't really learn too much about the lieutenant or anything more about Merrill or Phoebe, so I'm going to give it an 8 for character. I love the way it deals with Fairfax's character, but I think that's probably about it. Narrative, again, I like how, you see, I'm actually going to give this one a relatively high narrative mark because it doesn't give us a ton of exposition. Because now we're starting to relax and actually see these characters. Oh, okay, we have all the information about Fairfax now. We're seeing this guy coming on. We could actually just sit back and enjoy some of the story now after we've just been info dumped in the last scene and in the scenes before. So I'm actually going to give this an 8 for narrative because I feel like we're really starting to enjoy this interaction. Just the nobility with which Fairfax conducts himself. There is something to be admired in that. I'm not admiring his arbitrary etiquette. I'm just admiring the grace and politeness with which he conducts himself. under what is obviously an extremely stressful and horrible situation for him. I imagine if this was me and I was about to be executed, I would not be behaving like Fairfax is behaving. And maybe that just means that he's some kind of weird psychopath who feels no fear, and that can be a way of playing him. But also, he could just be a person who says, well, you know what? Life is what it's going to be, and there's no use fighting against it. And he's been in, as he says to Meryl, he's been in worse situations than this and has escaped. So he's just going to go with the flow. And there's something quite cool about that. It's very unlike me, but I can certainly admire that. It's not side-splittingly funny, but I think it's very witty. And so I'm going to give it a 7 for both poetry and comedy, because I'm not quite sure where to give those marks to, so I'm just going to give both like a decent mark. But I do think that Fairfax's language is really beautiful. Do not weep for me, alas. Life such as mine is not worth weeping for. And it is easier to die well than to live well, forsooth. I have tried both. He's so clever. I really do like Fairfax, at least certain interpretations of him. I know he can be played in a nasty way, and I would not like that guy. Emotional dramatic impact. Again, I actually think the calmness with which he is conducting himself, I think makes it almost more poignant. I'm going to give this an 8 for emotional dramatic impact. I really do enjoy this little scene. I know it's not very long and not too much happens in it, but it's a lovely break from all this info dumping, and it really helps us to understand a character that can be very misunderstood.
And now, Sir Richard, I have a boon to beg. I am in this strait for no better reason than because my kinsman, Sir Clarence Poltwhistle, one of the Secretaries of State, has charged me with sorcery, in order that he may succeed to my estate, which devolves to him provided I die unmarried. As thou wilt most surely do. Nay, as I will most surely not do, by your worship's grace. I have a mind to thwart this good cousin of mine. How? By marrying forthwith, to be sure.
But heaven and mercy, whom wouldst thou marry?
Nay, I am indifferent on that score. Coming death hath made me a true and chivalrous knight, who holds all womankind in such esteem that the oldest and the meanest and the worst favoured of them is good enough for him. So, my good lieutenant, if thou wouldst serve a poor soldier who has but an hour to live, find me the first that comes. My confessor shall marry us, and her dower shall be my dishonoured name and 100 crowns to boot. A strange request. I doubt that I should be warranted in granting it. There was never a marriage fraught with so little evil to the contracting parties. In an hour she'll be a widow, and I a bachelor again, for aught I know. Well, I will see what can be done, for I hold my kinsman in abhorrence for the scurvy trick he has played thee. 1,000 thanks, good sir. We meet again on this spot in an hour or so. I shall be a bridegroom then, and your worship will wish me joy. Till then, farewell. I am ready, good fellows. He is a brave fellow, and it is a pity he should die. Now, how to find him a bride at such short notice? The task should be easy.
Well, looky here, we thought we were done with the exposition, but there's more. Turns out Fairfax wants to get married, and the lieutenant has to help him find a wife at short notice. So yeah, again, this scene, there's not really any character in this scene. We're not really learning anything about the lieutenant or Colonel Fairfax, and the language is slightly stilted, which, what's interesting about it is that I have never minded in any other opera like Pirates of Penzance, The Mikado, when characters say things that people wouldn't usually say. But the trouble is, because Yeomen feels more conversational and more grounded in reality, when people say jarring lines or really long sentences, it does feel wrong in a way that similar lines would not feel wrong in Pirates of Penzance or Mikado. And that initial line that Fairfax says, it just seems, it's so wordy. And now, Sir Richard, I have a boon to beg. I am in this strait for no better reason than because my kinsman, Sir Clarence Poltwhistle, one of the Secretaries of State, is you know, he has to explain who this guy is. It's just so much. Has charged me with sorcery, in order that he may succeed to my estate, which devolves to him, provided I die unmarried. this is not the way that people speak. And I get that this kind of has to be the case, but it's just because we are in this ostensibly quite real universe with real people. And after Fairfax has introduced himself so beautifully in the previous scene, it is jarring to me, the way this language is. This poetry isn't at all beautiful. I'm going to give this a 4 for poetry, I'm afraid. Comedy. Is there anything... I mean, I guess when Lieutenant says, "Oh, what kind of person would you want to marry? Oh, who would you marry?" Well, I am indifferent on that score. The fact that I'm going to die has made me a pure and chivalrous knight who holds all women in equal esteem. That is quite funny. I do think that's quite sweet. So I'm going to give that a 6 for comedy. Character, yeah. Again, there's not really much character in this scene. After Fairfax has been introduced so beautifully in the previous scene, and we still don't really ever know who the lieutenant is. He's just one of these dry characters whose function is to talk to other people and help them reveal who they are. And, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the lieutenant can be a really fun part, but not really in this scene. He's fine in this scene, but I'm only going to give that a 5 for character. I don't really think much is said. Nothing is said which is confusing, so I'm not going to give it less than a 5. Narrative. Okay, yeah, so this does get quite a high narrative mark, but it comes at the expense of the poetry and the characters. So again, I'm going to give it an 8. I'm going to admit that, yeah, there is narrative in this scene, but it's delivered in a way that I don't think is immediately accessible, and it is actually, there's a lot of exposition, there's a lot of narrative in this show, and I do think some things could be so easily missed. When my boyfriend actually watched the ENO Yeomen of the Guard with me, he did feel like he understood what was going on. I do think I had to have a conversation with him in the interval to kind of help him understand a little bit of what was going on. But also he had looked it up before we went there. I should have, as an experiment, asked him not to, but sadly, I cannot turn back time. Emotional dramatic impact. I'm going to give that a 3. For somebody who's about to die, this is a very undramatic and unemotional scene, so I think a 3 is all it deserves.
My masters, I pray you bear with us, and we will satisfy you, for we are merry folk who would make all as merry as ourselves. For look you, there is humour in all things, and the truest philosophy is that which teaches us to find it and to make the most of it. Hands off, I say, unmannerly fellow. Ha! Didst thou not hear her say, hands off? Aye, I heard her say it, and I felt her do it. What then? Thou dost not see the humour of that. Nay, if I do, hang me. Thou dost not? Now observe. She said, hands off. Whose hands? Thine. Of whom? Of her. Why? Because she is a woman. Now, had she not been a woman, thine hands had not been set upon her at all. So the reason for the laying on of hands is the reason for the taking off of hands, and herein is contradiction contradicted. It is the very marriage of pro with con, and no such lopsided union either, as times go, for pro is not more unlike con than man is unlike woman, yet men and women marry every day, with none to say, oh, the pity of it! But I, and fools like me. Now, wherewithal shall we please you? We can rhyme you couplet, triolet, quatrain, sonnet, rondelet, ballade, what you will, or we can dance you saraband, gondole, carol, pimpernel, or jumping Joan. Let us give them the singing farce of the merry man and his maid. Therein is song and dance too. I, the merry man and his maid.
Is this scene annoying? Do I find Jack Point's speech a little bit heteronormative? I suppose he is specifically referring to the man that tried to touch Elsie. So, yeah, I guess he's really just making fun of that man and talking about how he laid hands on Elsie because she is a woman, but had to take them off her because she is a woman. I don't like any saying or joke where the meaning of it, the overall message of it is, oh, aren't men and women so different? I find that a little bit annoying, but I do appreciate the poetry in this scene. I do think that if we're taking any potential sexism out of it, I do think that it is quite funny. That is quite clever. The reason for the laying on of hands is the reason for the laying off of hands. I appreciate that is quite a funny, ironic thing. But apart from that, what is happening in this scene? We are learning that Point is very high energy. We don't learn too much about Elsie, but presumably she is the same. We don't ever really learn too much about who Elsie is. She's typically played in quite a solemn way, which is very odd to me, just because she's meant to be a merry maid, or the maid to the merry man. But I think it's decent enough for Jack Point's character. We're getting across that he's very high energy, he's very quick on his feet. So yeah, I'm going to give that an 8 for character. Only an 8 because I don't think that Elsie is represented too well. I don't really know what we learn about Elsie. Comedy, yeah, I'm going to give it a 6. I think that is quite a clever remark about the laying on and laying off of hands. We don't learn anything really narrative-wise, but again, I'm not complaining about that. I think it's quite nice that we're having a little bit of a break from, oh, this is the person who's this, and this is the story, and more things are happening. This is just like a little amuse-bouche. We're just like, yeah, these characters are on stage, and this is who they are. So I'm going to give it a 7 for narrative. I don't think it obstructs the narrative. I actually think we have a well-deserved break from being bombarded with information, which I think is very good. Emotional dramatic impact, though, I think that these two, when they come on, do have a big dramatic impact. Here's the Man of Jollity is a great number. I remember having to conduct that in a concert, and it's really fun to learn to keep switching between 4/4 and 5/4, and that is a fun one. Anyway, that's a big dramatic entrance, and the energy kind of continues into the dialogue as well, especially because the music kind of keeps going underneath Jack Point's initial speech. And you know what? I'm being a bit unfair to Elsie. We do learn that she's quite strong. Hands off, I say. So yeah, I'm actually going to give that a 9 for character, not an 8. But yeah, emotional dramatic impact. Dramatic impact is the one that's high here, but it's not overly high. I'm going to give it a 6. And poetry, yeah, I think Jack Point has some really awesome poetry in his speech. I think that his line is very well constructed and it's quite fun to say. As I say, I didn't practice the dialogue before I read it, so I think I probably could have read it a little bit better. But when I've seen other people doing it, they do such a good job at this bit, and it's a really lovely thing to listen to. It sounds really nice. It's off who's off hers, you know. It's a great little quick bit of poetry. So I'm going to give that an 8 as well. Well sung and well danced. A kiss for that pretty maid. Aye, a kiss all round. Best beware, I am armed. Back, sirs, back. This is going too far. Thou dost not see the humour of it, eh? Yet there is humour in all things, even this. Help! Help! What is this pother? Sir, we sang to these folk, and they would have repaid us with gross courtesy but for your honour's coming. Away with ye! Clear the rabble! Now, my girl, who are you, and what do you here? May it please you, sir, we are 2 strolling players, Jack Point and I, Elsie Maynard, at your worship's service. We go from fair to fair, singing and dancing and playing brief interludes, and so we make a poor living. You too, eh? Are ye man and wife? No, sir, for though I'm a fool, there is limit to my folly. Her mother, old Bridget Maynard, travels with us, for Elsie is a good girl, but the woman is abed with fever, and we have come here to pick up some silver to buy an electuary for her. Hark ye, my girl, your mother is ill? Sorely ill, sir. And needs good food, and many things that thou canst not buy. Alas, sir, 'tis too true. Wouldst thou earn 100 crowns? 100 crowns? They might save her life. Then listen. A worthy but unhappy gentleman is to be beheaded in an hour on this very spot. For sufficient reasons he desires to marry before he dies, and he hath asked me to find him a wife. Wilt thou be that wife? The wife of a man I have never seen. Oh, why, sir, look you, I am concerned in this, for though I am not yet wedded to Elsie Maynard, time works wonders, and there's no knowing what may be in store for us. Have we your worship's word for it that this gentleman will die today? Nothing is more certain, I grieve to say.
and that the maiden will be allowed to depart the very instant the ceremony is at an end.
The very instant. I pledge my honour that it is so.
100 crowns.
100 crowns.
For my part, I consent.
It is for Elsie to speak. So I really love this scene because this is where the decision is made that totally derails everything and like ruins these people's lives. Well, at least it ruins Jack Point's life. You could argue that Fairfax and Elsie turned out pretty well at the end. But I do love the fact that, yeah, we are getting some more narrative, but I don't mind. It doesn't feel like so much of an info dump. We're not getting a whole lengthy explanation as to exactly why Fairfax wants to get married, which I appreciate. It's nice that we feel that the story is moving along now. I also love the fact that Elsie is the one speaking for them on a number of these occasions when the lieutenant addresses him. Yeah, he is addressing her, so it's only right that she replies, but Gilbert also chose to have the lieutenant address her. He could very easily have just spoken to the man and have the man reply to both of them. So I really appreciate that Gilbert wrote some lines for her. And it does bring out her character as well. It shows that she's confident, she's probably relatively extroverted. There's also some comedy in this scene too. I actually find the line, "Married to a man I have never seen," both funny and quite emotional. And it's really interesting to see the hoops that Jack Point is jumping through. He doesn't want Elsie to marry this person, but he also he isn't really ready to admit to her how he feels about her. This is like a really interesting bit I find in this scene. I think I discussed this with Will. I can't remember if that made the cut of our Patterol's video. But we were discussing whether or not Elsie hears this interaction, and it seems like she can't, you know, but time works wonders. It seems like she doesn't really hear that, because that's a really weird thing to say and like not have anything to say about and not respond to, unless Jack Point goes on about how much he loves her all the time, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. He's very different to Wilfred. So like Wilfred isn't particularly clever, but he is very eloquent about how he feels about Phoebe. In fact, it's the only time when he is eloquent, when he's talking to Phoebe about how he feels about her. Yet Jack Point is eloquent in every situation apart from being in love with somebody. I wonder if that was intentional on Gilbert's part. I wonder if he realised he has these polar opposite people. Somebody who is not scared at all about his feelings, and somebody who was very clever, very good with his words, like is literally made a profession out of using his words, but cannot tell Elsie how he feels about her. So that's why this bit seems a bit weird. So I do think that's a bit confusing narratively, so I can't give it more than a 7 for that, just because I don't really get what the problem is then. Like, why isn't he just telling Elsie how he feels about her? Why hasn't he asked her to marry him properly? Is it because of Bridget Maynard? Because if it purely is only that, and she just doesn't feel the same way, but she's not replying to him, she's not saying anything either, so unless she's leading him on and just kind of letting him believe that one day they will be married, I don't know. It's a really weird situation, but you solve that problem by just imagining that she doesn't hear that. So usually that's probably the way I direct it. I imagine she doesn't hear that bit, and that totally solves that confusion. Because I don't mind Jack Point being a flawed character. Of course he's a flawed character. He's a coward. He's a little bit like the Patagon and Mikado in a way. But I do think that if you play him entirely flawed, then it's just less interesting than him being somewhat sympathetic. I think all the characters in this opera are sympathetic, and that's what makes it so interesting. Emotional dramatic impact. I find it emotional in virtue of what it means for what happens later. So again, I'm gonna give that a 7. I do like this scene as an introduction to their story. Character, yeah, I like Elsie's character. I like Jack Point's character in it. Lieutenant, again, he doesn't really have so much of a character, but I'm gonna give that an 8. Is it funny? Again, it's not side-splittingly funny. Remember that I'm judging all these scenes against each other. I don't think any of these scenes so far are as funny as any of the scenes in the Mikado. I don't think that's going to happen. But according to the general level of comedy in this show, I think I'm going to give that a 7 as well. So it's middle of the road for me. Poetry, Yeah, it's Jack Point, and he says a lot of quite eloquent things. So again, I'm going to give that a 7. So yeah, this scene is a pretty good scene. I do like it. Gilbert is doing a good job here, but has this blown me away in the same way as some of the others? Probably not. But well done, Gilbert. Well done.
And so, good fellow, you are a jester. Aye, sir, and, like some of my jests, out of place. I have a vacancy for such an one. Tell me, what are your qualifications for such a post? Marry, sir, I have a pretty wit. I can rhyme you extempore. I can convulse you with quip and conundrum. I have the lighter philosophies at my tongue's tip. I can be merry, wise, quaint, grim, and sardonic, one by one, or all at once. I have a pretty turn for anecdote. I know all the jests, ancient and modern, past, present, and to come. I can riddle you from dawn of day to set of sun, and, if that content you not, well on to midnight and the small hours. Oh, sir, a pretty wit, I warrant you, a pretty, pretty wit. And how came you to leave your last employ? Why, sir, it was in this wise. My lord was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it was considered that one of my jokes was unsuited to his Grace's family circle. In truth, I venture to ask a poor riddle, sir, wherein lay the difference between his Grace and poor Jack Point. His Grace was pleased to give it up, sir, and thereupon I told him that whereas his Grace was paid £10,000 a year for being good, poor Jack Point was good for nothing. 'Twas but a harmless jest, but it offended his Grace, who whipped me and sent me in the stocks for a scurril rogue, and so we parted. I had as lief not take post again with the dignified clergy. But I trust you were very careful not to give offence. I have daughters. Sir, my jests are most carefully selected, and anything objectionable is expunged. If your honour pleases, I will try them first on your honour's chaplain. Can you give me an example? Say that I had sat me down hurriedly on something sharp. Sir, I should say that you had sat down on the spur of the moment. I don't think much of that. Is that the best you can do? It has always been much admired, sir, but we will try again. Well, then, I am at dinner, and the joint of meat is but half cooked. Why, then, sir, I should say that what is underdone cannot be helped. I see. I think that manner of thing might be somewhat irritating. At first, sir, perhaps, but use is everything, and you would come in time to like it. We will suppose that I caught you kissing the kitchen wench under my very nose. Under her very nose, good sir, not under yours. That is where I would kiss her. Do you take me? Oh, sir, a pretty wit, a pretty, pretty wit. The maiden comes. Follow me, friend, and we will discuss this matter at length in my library. I am your worship's servant. That is to say, I trust I soon shall be. But before proceeding to a more serious topic, can you tell me, sir, why a cook's brain pan is like an overwound clock? A truce to this fooling. Follow me. Just my luck. My best conundrum wasted. Okay, so this is a scene that I'm properly excited about. I think this one is one of my favourite scenes in the show. Probably not my absolute favourite, but it is way up there. It's very funny, but bizarrely, I think the lieutenant is actually funnier than Point in this scene. I think it's so silly the way it's like, yeah, I think that would just be a bit irritating. Like, he's so blunt with how he says it. And I suppose, yeah, you would be, because he has total control of the situation. And yet it does remind me of John Wellington Wells's sales pitch in his song, like, this is Jack Point's chance. Yeah, I'm going to do this. And you'll notice that I combine the two scenes together as well, because, you know, it's the same two people talking, and it's much the same. The focus of the scene is Jack Point getting a job. So I don't think it makes sense to split them up in that way. So yeah, I think this scene is really funny. I'm going to give it a 9. I may change that to a 10 if I find that no scene is funnier, but for now I can't imagine that it is the funniest scene. So I'm going to give it a 9, but I do think it is a really great scene. Poetry wise, I'm not blown away by it, but I do think it's a pretty good one. I know.
It's so sad, isn't it, Sullivan? You want to go outside. That's our new cat wanting to go out. He can't open the door anymore, though. Oh, no, I'm going backwards in time. So I filmed a video with Will yesterday, and all the way through the video I kept having to get up to let one of my flatmates in because we had to tie the door shut with a scarf. But a locksmith came this morning and actually fixed the door, so now we can just lock it because this cat can open the door. He can actually open the door. And he's very sad that he can no longer open the door. So yeah, that's him crying. I promise you we're not mistreating him. He is just desperate to get outside because he is never satisfied. Oh, you're never satisfied. Ow! Poetry, I think the use of language in this scene is great. Again, like, Point is just so quick on his feet. Under her very nose, sir. That's where I kiss her, not under yours. Do you take me? Oh, it's very, very funny. What is underdone cannot be helped. He's a funny guy, and I just think his use of language is lovely. It's both funny and sweet. But I'll give him an 8 for poetry. I do think this scene does really well poetry-wise. Hello, Serpent. Do you want to introduce yourself? Hey, Serpent. No. Character. Yeah, again, Jack Point has already introduced himself and it's much more of the same, but he has maintained that character very well. Do we learn a bit more about the Lieutenant? I think we do. I'm going to give this an 8 for character because I think the Lieutenant is revealing himself a little bit. I wonder if he is actually having a little bit of fun with Jack Point here. Like, he knows he's going to hire him, but he's just playing a bit hard to get. Like, I see. I think he's actually got a real soft spot for Jack Point, but he's very good at keeping his cards close to his chest. Narrative. There's not much narrative. This is just like a really fun scene between two guys, and it's just, well, Elsie is getting married, isn't it? Elsie's all blindfolded and getting married to Fairfax, and Point's there probably nervously waiting. I think when I did this in the other year, for the first few lines of the scene, he was kind of staring off, like thinking, oh God, Elsie's getting married, Elsie's getting married. Oh, wait, there's a job! Right, sales pitch time. So that was kind of how we did it that time. Emotional dramatic impact. Yeah, again, I do think that this has emotional resonance purely because you really feel how desperately Jack Point wants his part. I don't think I can give it much more than a 7. Narrative, I also don't think I can give it really any more than a 7 because we don't really move the story along, but it is a lovely piece between two funny characters. The Lieutenant, as I say, bizarrely, is probably the funnier character in this scene, but it's one that I really like. I know Will really likes it. I think we even did this scene for the Pasha Rules video, but I don't know if it made the cut. I'll have to watch that again and see if it did. But this is one of Will's favourite scenes, and I had a lot of fun playing the Lieutenant in that scene with him. 'Tis an odd freak for a dying man and his confessor to be closeted alone with a strange singing girl. I would fain have espied them, but they stopped up the keyhole. My keyhole. Wilfred, and alone. Now what could he have wanted with her? That's what puzzles me. Now to get the keys from him. Wilfred, has no reprieve arrived? None. Thine adored Fairfax is to die. Yea, thou knowest I have naught but pity for the poor condemned gentleman. I know that he who is about to die is more to thee than I, who am alive and well. Why, that were out of reason, dear Wilfred. Do they not say that a live ass is better than a dead lion? No, I don't mean that. Oh, they say that, do they? It's unpardonably rude of them, but I believe they put it in that way. Not that it applies to thee, who art clever beyond all telling. Oh, yes, as an assistant tormentor. Nay, as a wit, as a humourist, as a most philosophic commentator on the vanity of human resolution. Truly, I have seen great resolution give way under my persuasive methods. In the nice regulation of a thumbscrew, in the 100th part of a single revolution, lieth all the difference between stony reticence and a torrent of impulsive unbosoming that the pen can scarcely follow. I am a mad wag.
thou art a most light-hearted and delightful companion, Master Wilfred. Thine anecdotes of the torture chamber are the prettiest hearing.
I'm a pleasant fellow, and I choose. I believe I am the merriest dog that barks.
Oh,
We might be passing happy together.
perhaps. I do not know.
For thou wouldst make a most tender and loving wife.
I? To one whom I really loved? For there is a wealth of love within this little heart, saving up for... I wonder who. Now, of all the world of men, I wonder who. To think that he who I am to wed is alive, and somewhere, perhaps far away, perhaps close at hand. And yet I know him not. Seems I'm wasting time in not knowing him.
Now, say that it is I. Nay, suppose it for the nonce. Say that we are wed, suppose it only. Say that thou art my very bride, and I thy cheery, joyous, bright, frolicsome husband, and that the day's work being done, and the prisoners stored away for the night, thou and I are alone together, with a long, long evening before us.
It is a pretty picture. And yet I scarcely know. It comes so unexpectedly, and yet... Were I thy bride?
Aye. Wert thou my bride?
Oh, how I would love thee.
Wow, this scene. I like this scene. I'm going to give this scene a 10 out of 10 for comedy. But it's not perfect. And I am going to go into why that isn't perfect as soon as I've written the number 10 in comedy. 1-0. There we are. So, I find this scene quite difficult as an actor. And I'm going to tell you the reason I find it difficult. The thing about acting somebody who's lying is that you have to make it clear to the audience that you're lying. But in real life, humans are way better at lying than their on-stage character counterparts would make you believe. So when you have the line, say, "Thou art a most light-hearted and delightful companion, Master Wilfred, thy anecdotes of the torture chamber are the prettiest hearing," you have to have a slight amount of grimace there to prove that you're not telling the truth, to maintain that humour for the audience. But at the same time, like, humans are really good at lying. And her life's on the line here. So really, should you be saying that line, "Thou art a most light-hearted and delightful companion, Master Wilfred. Thine anecdotes of the torture chamber are the prettiest hearing." Maybe it should be delivered that way, because you always see it delivered like, and like she can't bear him. And things, obviously she can bear him, and she's not afraid to talk to him or tell him how she feels about him. So it seems like if her life really was on the line, which it is, she would be better at lying than this. But then it's actually very hard to deliver these lines completely truthfully, because you know that in the universe of the show they're not truthful, unless they actually are. Unless Phoebe actually does really like Wilfred, and this is when she realises it. That's how I kind of attempted to play it when I played Phoebe many years ago now. I remember that line, "But were I thy bride? Oh, how I would love thee." And maybe that can be something real, in which case that scene suddenly opens up and becomes very emotional. But then is that fair to the text? Like, can we say that's fair to the text? I don't know, it's a weird one, but I do find that I don't like it when people really play up the resistance angle with Phoebe, and much prefer it when she's believable. And I think even I wasn't really playing it particularly believable just then, because it's very difficult to, as I say, it's just hard as an actor to know exactly how to play this scene, and I do struggle with it. And I think if I were to play Phoebe again, this is a scene that I'd like lots of advice from a director as to like how it looks from the outside, because it is hard to imagine like what is the funniest thing to do with it, or what is like the fairest thing to the characters and the text to do. Her speech about perhaps far away, perhaps close at hand, I think that's a really sweet speech, and yet I know him not. It seemeth I am wasting time in not knowing him. It's true, it's funny, it's very sweet, very emotional. I would actually give this a 9 for emotional dramatic impact, because even if these two are kind of playing and they're not really being serious about how they feel about each other. Well, I mean, Wilfred seems to think he is, but Phoebe is just playing with him. She's not really being serious. There is some actual emotion inside her. She does really want to feel this way for somebody. For Wilfred, maybe not yet, but certainly she has that power inside of her to feel that way about somebody. And that is very nice. Narrative, yeah, this is really good narrative, because what's happening is that the story is actually going on outside of what they're talking about. So this scene is essentially a distraction where Meryl can nip in, get the keys, and go out, unlock Fairfax's cell and bring the keys back again. So this is actually important to the story, yet we're not being bombarded with lots of information. So yeah, I'm going to give this an 8 for narrative, because it is a very important scene for the story, but we're not really learning anything new or seeing much progression. We don't actually see Fairfax being unlocked from his cell. But then again, I don't know. I'm actually going to give it a 9, because I do feel like the fact that Phoebe and Wilfred are making a step forward in their relationship potentially is to do with the show. Like, that is actually relevant to the story of Yeomen of the Guard. And character-wise, I'm going to give it a 9 just because it's a bit more of the same from what we've seen in their first scene. Not quite a 10, but I do absolutely love it. Poetry-wise, I think Phoebe's speech is lovely, but I do think that it's more conversational than beautiful poetry, so I don't think I can give it more than an 8. But yeah, it does do really well. I really do love this scene. It's a big favourite of mine. I still just don't think I've cracked exactly how to play it. No. Thou art not. Not yet. But Lord, how she wooed. I should be no mean judge of wooing, seeing that I have been more hotly wooed than most men. I have been wooed by maid, by widow, and by wife. I have been wooed boldly, timidly, tearfully, shyly, by direct assault, by suggestion, by implication, by inference, and by innuendo. But this wooing, it's not of the common order. It is the wooing of one who must needs woo me, if she die for it. What I love about this little scene here is that if we take what Wilfred is saying at face value, which, you know, why not? Maybe he's this like super hot guy, maybe he's like a jock. And actually he's really popular in the Tower of London, but the one person he likes doesn't particularly feel the same way about him. Or maybe she's just playing hard to get. I mean, we don't really know about Phoebe and Wilfred. I like to think she's just immature, not really ready for a relationship, and would rather fantasize over somebody she doesn't really know, who is just this faraway guy, and who's about to be executed as well, than somebody who is really close by, somebody who she's actually in danger of having a real human relationship with, which she doesn't really feel quite ready for. I think that's probably more likely what's going on here. But maybe Wilfred is actually like super popular and everything he's saying here is true. Like, yeah, he's actually been wooed a lot. But this is wooing of a different order. So yeah, I want to take him at face value. So yeah, Wilfred's little monologue. I mean, narratively, I can only give it a 5 because nothing actually happens in it and it's so short. Emotional dramatic impact, again, like I can't really give it more than a 6 because it is so short. But hey, character-wise, I love this. It is so personal. I think that Wilfred is opening up to the audience a bit here, and I love the fact that he's addressing the audience. Wilfred addresses the audience, I think, more than any other character, because this is the second time he's done it, and I believe Fairfax also maybe does it twice. I could be wrong. Jack Point does it once as well, but it really truly feels like he is, saying, hey audience, like, did you just get a load of that? And it seems like he's really going out of the play to talk to us, and I just really love that. Comedy, yeah, it's so short. I'm going to give it an 8 for that. Poetry, I'm going to give it a 7, but character, I'm going to give that a 10. I love this about Wilfred. I love how he's telling us about his past. And yeah, quite a past he's got. The deed is, so far, safely accomplished. The sly boots, how she wheedled him. What a helpless ninny is a lovesick man. He is but a lute in a woman's hands. She plays upon him whatever tune she will. But the colonel comes. Faith, he's just in time, for the yeoman parade here for his execution in 2 minutes. My good and kind friend, thou runnest a grave risk for me. Tut, sir, no risk. I'll warrant none here will recognise you. You make a brave yeoman, sir. So, this ruff is too high. So, and the sword should hang thus. Here is your halbert, sir. Carry it thus. The yeomen come. Now, remember, you are my brave son, Leonard Merrill. If I may not bear mine own name, there is none other I would bear so readily. Now, sir, put a bold face on it, for they come. Okay, so this is such a short scene and so little happens in it that I imagine it's not going to do particularly well, but there is a little bit of narrative in it, so I'm going to give it a 6. Emotional dramatic impact, yeah, I guess there's a bit of anxiety in there. I don't think we're feeling nothing from watching this, so I'm going to give it a 5. I do think it deserves something. Comedy. There aren't any jokes in it, really, are there? It's not unfunny. I'm going to give it a 5. It's not as if there's an attempt at a joke that really fails. It's just not particularly funny. I will say, though, that me and Will had a very funny time with this scene, because he was playing Sergeant Merrill in one of the instances of Yeomen that I directed. And we find the line about, this ruff is too high. We thought it would be funny if Fairfax just walked on, just like holding his ruff like really high above his head and like, oh, Sergeant Merrill, you run a grave risk for me. And Sergeant was like, this ruff is too high, and pulls it down. He's just like holding it like this. It's stupid. It's really stupid. But this is where our minds walk to, like Fairfax is holding it way above his head. So you run a grave risk for me. This ruff is too high. Oh yeah, it's too high. The sword line is always cut. Have you ever actually seen a production of Yeomen where they have swords? I've never seen that line actually be done. At least not in my memory. Character, yeah, nothing particularly happens. It's nice to see Fairfax and Merrill finally able to talk freely. I'm going to give it a 6. I don't see anything wrong with it. Poetry, I do like the line of sly boots, how she wheedled him. It's quite a fun line. I'm going to give it a 6. There's nothing wrong with this scene. It's just not designed to be really a big scene. It's just a nice pre-Act 1 finale divertissement. And they're on stage and they're ready. He says the yeoman come twice, doesn't he? Anyway, I don't think it's superbly written, but I don't have a huge problem with it, really. The Merry Jests of Hugh Ambrose, number 7863. The Poor Wit and the Rich Counsellor. A certain poor wit, being an hungered, did meet a well-fed counsellor. Marry, fool, quoth the counsellor, whither away? In truth, said the poor wag, in that I have eaten naught these 2 days, I do wither away, and that right rapidly. The counsellor laughed hugely, and gave him a sausage. The counsellor was easier to please than my new master, the lieutenant. I would like to take post under the counsellor. Ah, 'tis but melancholy, mummy, when poor heartbroken, jilted Jack Point must needs turn to Hugh Ambrose for original light humour. Ah, Master Point. Ha!
Friend jailer, jailer that wast, jailer that never shall be more, jailer that jailed not all that jailed, if jail he did so unjailily, that 'twas but Jerry jailing, or jailing in joke, though no joke to him who by unjailer-like jailing did so jeopardise his jailership. Come, take heart, smile, laugh, wink, twinkle, thou tormentor that tormentest not, thou racker that rackest not, thou pincher out of place, come, take heart, and be merry, as I am. As I am. Ay, 'tis well for thee to laugh. Thou hast a good post, and hast cause to be merry. Cause? Have we not all cause? Is not the world a big butt of humour, into which all who will may drive a gimlet? See, I am a salaried wit, and is there aught in nature more ridiculous? A poor, dull, heartbroken man, who must needs be merry, or he will be whipped, who must rejoice, lest he starve, who must jest you, drive you, quit you, crank you, rack you, riddle you from hour to hour, from day to day, from year to year, lest he dwindle, perish, starve, pine, and die. Why, when there's naught else to laugh at, I laugh at myself till I ache for it. Yet I have often thought that a jester's calling would suit me to a hair. Thee? Would suit thee? Thou death's head and crossbones. I have a pretty wit, a light, airy, joysome wit, spiced with anecdotes of prison cells and the torture chamber. Oh, a very delicate wit. I have tried it on many a prisoner, and there have been some who smiled. Now, it is not easy to make a prisoner smile, and it should not be difficult to be a good jester, seeing that thou art one. Difficult? Nothing easier. Attend, and I will prove it to thee. So, thou wouldst be a jester, eh? Aye. Now listen. My sweetheart, Elsie Maynard, was secretly wed to this Fairfax half an hour ere he escaped. She did well. She did nothing of the kind, so hold thy peace and perpend. Now, while he liveth, she is dead to me, and I to her, and so my jibes and jokes notwithstanding, I am the saddest and the sorriest dog in England. Thou art a very dull dog indeed. Now, if thou wilt swear that thou didst shoot this Fairfax, whilst he was trying to swim across the river, it needs but the discharge of an arquebus on a dark night, and that he sank and was seen no more, I'll make thee the very Archbishop of Jesters, and that in 2 days' time. Now what sayest thou? I am to lie? Hardly. But thy lie must be a lie of circumstance, which I will support with the testimony of eyes, ears, and tongue. And thou wilt qualify me as a jester. As a jester among jesters. I will teach thee all my original songs, my self-constructed riddles, my own ingenious paradoxes. Nay, more, I will reveal to thee the source whence I get them. Now, what sayest thou? Why, if it be but a lie thou want'st of me, I hold it cheap enough, and I say yes, it's a bargain.
No, you haven't gone mad. I have changed my clothes. I have also gone to sleep and woken up and done a day of work and then come home and put my phone on its tripod and started to film. I did not have much time to finish the video yesterday, so I did not finish the video, hence why a day has passed since my last little bits. I'm having a very bad day today. I don't know if any of y'all out there suffer from crippling depression like I do, but it's been particularly bad this week. I don't know if it's because the festival's coming up. I have no idea. I do have some nasty memories connected with the festival, so perhaps that's why I get anxious in the run-up to it. Even though I'm really, really happy to see everyone, I also do get a little bit nervous about going there. And there's a lot of pressure on me, mostly self-imposed pressure, to do really well at this festival and be amazing, because it's one of the few chances I've had to be on stage this year. And I get to do it twice. I get to be Lisa and Mad Margaret. So I'm really hoping it goes okay. I've been having some vocal difficulties recently. Whenever I try and project, I find I have this tickling in my throat. So it's not a pain, but it just kind of tickles and cracks and makes me feel like I need to cough. So I'm a little bit worried. I'm a little bit worried about that. So I've been very anxious and depressed, and I don't have another opportunity to film this video, so I can't wait to see if I feel better tomorrow. So you're just going to have to deal with me being a little bit depressed, I'm afraid. So maybe it's appropriate I'm talking about this scene with poor, jilted, heartbroken Jack Point. So this, I think, probably will end up being my favourite scene in the show. I did put the two scenes together. It seemed appropriate in this instance. So Jack Point and Wilfred, we've seen them apart before this, and that's Wilfred's dialogue. Hey, how about that dialogue? He's got some great lines. And Jack Point has already been this amazing character so far in the show, and to see them come together and the heightened emotion that's going on here. I absolutely love the way that Jack Point is putting a brave face on his situation, even though you can tell that he's really falling apart inside, even just with the way the words are written. And I suppose it would be up to the individual actor how much you show that. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer here. I always prefer it when you don't get lots of bitterness with Jack Point's character, because then I find that automatically makes me feel less empathy towards him. And it's also not terribly nice to see him overly self-indulgent, because again, then you kind of lose a bit of empathy for him. I find the most tragic way of playing this is if you can tell he's really trying to keep it in. Who must rejoice, or he'll be whipped. Because as I find that even right now, I am in the absolute depths of depression. I am feeling horrible. I'm actually in physical discomfort because of how depressed I am right now. And yet, my automatic reaction to when anyone asks, "Are you okay?" It's like, "I'm good, yeah, I'm fine." And I don't think you'd ever be able to tell that I was depressed just from saying, "How are you?" "Yeah, I'm good. I'm all right. Yeah, I'm fine." You'd never know that I was falling apart inside. You'd never know that, would you? You know, isn't that interesting? But so I wonder if there is something in that there may be a way of acting this where Jack Point does just seem completely okay, except maybe things are just, he's just slightly overcompensating. So maybe he's like overly energized. It's interesting. There are so many ways you can play this scene, and this is probably one of my favorite scenes to watch, just to see what Jack Point does and how he plays it. Because he's got this wonderful person to act off as well. You've got Wilfred, who is just this so sweet, funny character. I think a jester's calling would suit me to a head. It's completely oblivious. Like, Wilfred is obviously oblivious. Yeah, he does say, "Thou art a very dull dog indeed." So Wilfred does recognise that Jack Point is sad. But this scene, I imagine it's going to get almost 10s across the board. I'm only going to give it a 9 for poetry. I'm not giving anything a 10 yet. But then actually, no, I'm going to give it a 10, because I do like the must rejoice, yet he starve, perish, pine and die. I love that speech. That's such a great speech. That was one of the ones where I didn't have to like film it in loads of takes, as I do find it just kind of flows out. It's not like a difficult line to say. Comedy, again, I'm gonna give it, just because you're not feeling quite perfectly comfortable, I'm only going to give this a 9 out of 10, but I do think it is really funny. The counsellor laughed hugely and gave him a sausage, and then Wilfred saying, "I am to lie." Like, there are some great moments in that. 10 for character. To me, that's a no-brainer. I'm also going to give it a 10 for narrative, because not only are we discovering these characters' like inner journeys and how they're evolving as characters, how they're kind of communicating with each other, but we're also learning what they're going to do next. And I'm going to give it a 10 for emotional dramatic impact as well, for all the reasons I stated above. I think that Jack Point and Wilfred here, they're both such great characters.
2 days gone, and no news of poor Fairfax. The dolts. They seek him everywhere, save within a dozen yards of his dungeon. So I am free. Free, but for the cursed haste with which I hurried headlong into the bonds of matrimony with heaven knows whom. As far as I remember, she should have been young, but even had not her face been concealed by her kerchief, I doubt whether, in my then plight, I should have taken much note of her. Free? Bah! The Tower bonds were but a thread of silk compared with these conjugal fetters which I, fool that I was, placed upon my own hands. From the one I broke readily enough. How to break the other?
Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this one for long because it's so short, but I must say that this is really good language. I think that the poetry of this is really beautiful. I've given this a 9 out of 10. This was a joy to say. As you'll see, I mean, please do correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I did the jump cut so well, even I myself didn't notice the edit, but I believe that I just read this in one take without stuttering or making any mistakes, because this is just really beautifully written prose. It's not terribly funny, but what it does do is that it reminds us of that element of the story. Because for anyone who's just been thinking about, Jack Point and Wilfred, may have forgotten, it was Fairfax that married Elsie. So I do think it's really good that at this point we are reminded. It could have happened that Fairfax could have just wandered on, and this could have been a recit, but I'm really glad that it wasn't a recit, because we did need reminding about that. So I've given narrative an 8. I've also given emotional dramatic impact a 6. I don't think it's hugely dramatic. In fact, you know what? I'm actually going to give it a 7, because I think that this situation that Fairfax has found himself in, it might not be tearing him apart inside, but I do appreciate the introspectiveness and the personality that this gives us an insight into. Good for character, good for narrative, short but sweet scene. Really very good. I think this may rank quite highly considering how short it is.
Well, Sergeant Merrill, and how fares thy pretty charge, Elsie Maynard? Well enough, sir. She is quite strong again and leaves us tonight. Thanks to Dame Carruthers' kind nursing, eh? Ay, deuce take the old witch. 'Twas but a sorry trick you played me, sir, to bring the fainting girl to me. It gave the old lady an excuse for taking up her quarters in my house, and for the last 2 years I've shunned her like the plague. Another day of it and she would have married me. Good Lord, here she is again. Harleen, go. Nay, Sergeant Merrill, don't go. I have something of grave import to say to thee. It's coming. Faith, I think I'm not wanted here. Nay, Master Leonard, I've naught to say to thy father that his son may not hear. True, I am one of the family. I had forgotten. 'Tis about this Elsie Maynard, a pretty girl, Master Leonard. Ay, fair as a peach blossom. What then? She hath a liking for thee, or I mistake not. With all my heart. She's as dainty a little maid as you'll find in a midsummer day's march. Then be warned in time, and give not thy heart to her. Oh, I know what it is to give my heart to one who will have none of it. Ay, she knows all about that. And why is my boy to take heed of her? She's a good girl, Dame Carruthers. Good enough for aught I know, but she's no girl. She's a married woman. A married woman? Tush, old lady, she's promised Sir Jack Point, the lieutenant's new jester. Tush in thy teeth, old man! As my niece Kate sat by her bedside today, this Elsie slept, and as she slept she moaned and groaned and turned this way and that way, and how shall I marry one I have never seen, quoth she, and then 100 crowns, quoth she, then is it certain he will die in an hour, quoth she, then I love him not, and yet I am his wife, quoth she. Is it not so, Kate?
Ay, aunt, 'tis even so.
Are you sure of all this?
Ay, sir, for I wrote it all down on my tablets.
Now, mark my words, it was of this Fairfax she spake, and he is her husband, or I'll swallow my kirtle. Is it true, sir? True? Why, the girl was raving. Why should she marry a man who had but an hour to live? Marry? There be those who would marry but for a minute rather than die old maids. Aye, I know one of them.
I honestly don't know if I utterly loathe this scene or think it is brilliant in a kind of weird avant-garde way. It just seems to be from a different show. Like, suddenly it's like, oh, we're getting weird, like, insult comedy, and suddenly, well, okay, we are halfway through the second act and we're getting exposition. So suddenly we realise that Dame Carruthers like really fancies Meryl. We had no indication of this in the previous act. And it just seems so lazy to me. And everything in this scene that is said just seems to be an excuse to get narrative across. So I don't know. I don't particularly. I'm just having to tilt the camera just to show you how cute Dora is. Isn't she so sweet? You're being so brave, Dora, being on camera, aren't you? Look at you. There's a girl. I'm gonna give you a scratch. Oh, that's nice. Isn't that nice? There's a good girl, Dora. Yay. Anyway, the question is, we do get across valuable narrative in this scene. However, it's done so in a horrible way. But it's so bad it's kind of funny. And the thing is, if this scene was in Pirates of Penzance or the Grand Duke, I'd probably love it. But it's just so out of place, and it's obviously trying to be funny, but it's really not funny at all. I think it was quite funny when I did it, and I'm not saying that's because I'm really, really funny and no one else that performs it is. I think the reason watching myself doing it is funny is because you can see how much I hate the scene, and you can just see that you can see this self-loathing element to it. So I think that's why I find myself doing it funny. But honestly, like, I remember having such difficulty directing this scene. It's just so stupid. It's really, really stupid in a way that I don't feel is earned by this show so far, because this show has been so, as I was saying in the last clip, very introspective, very emotional, very real, and then suddenly you've got these 4 characters, none of whom you particularly care about. I wouldn't even say you particularly care about Fairfax when we've not been taught to kind of feel anything really warm about Fairfax yet. Yeah, he's a cool guy, but we don't feel from the same way that we might like root for Phoebe, Elsie, Jack Point. You know, he's just a guy. And then we've got Sergeant Merrill, who we've not really been taught to care about. Dame Carruthers, who just seems to be a bit of an old battle axe, who's obsessed with Meryl, and for some reason he says another day of it, or she would have married me. But surely that's your choice if she marries you. I don't really understand why he would have, been coerced into it. I think just generally, I just don't like it when straight people in relationships seem to hate each other. Like, oh, that husband of mine, oh, the old ball and chain, that wife of mine. Like, just stop it. Straight people suck. Also, here's the thing as well. So Dame Carruthers is the one to mention, oh, Leonard, I think Elsie's taken a liking to you. And he says, well, but she's a good girl. And she goes, oh, she's no girl. She's a married woman. It's like, well, why did you bring it up then about her liking you if she's a married woman? So if your virtues are so strict, Dame Carruthers, why on earth are you bringing Elsie up and the fact that she seems to fancy Leonard? Why don't we see that? This is what I want to see in this show. Like, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when I talk about the next scene, which I do love. I do love the next scene, but we are missing some interaction between Elsie and Leonard / Fairfax. It's just weird to me that it seems like Dame Carruthers has brought up Elsie by saying, oh, she seems to have taken, oh, how fair she, and she said, oh, she's taken a liking to you. Why say that? Why mention that? Have they been around each other? It's really weird. I find it so odd. Hasn't she been in bed? And if she has been walking around, then why hasn't Jack Point been, like, talking to her? It's so bizarre. Because he's like, oh, she's dead to me. I refuse to believe that they wouldn't have just seen each other, caught a glimpse of each other. But, yeah, this scene just, like, raises so many plot holes for me. I'm going to give it a 5 for narrative, because I do appreciate that the narrative is progressing. But for everything else, I mean, emotional, dramatic impact, I mean, I'm giving that a 2. Character, I mean, I guess people are being their characters relatively consistently, but they're just trying to tell the story here in a really clunky way. I'm going to give that a 4 for character. Comedy, I'm going to give it a 0, because it's not funny at all. I'll swallow my curdle. Okay, I'll give that a 1. I'll give it a 1 for that one kind of slightly funny line. But nothing else in it is funny. Trying to derive humour from, like, how this old, presumably dreadfully unattractive woman fancies this man. Like, oh, isn't it hilarious? Oh, he doesn't fancy her. How is that funny? Come on, Gilbert, this is lazy writing. Poetry, okay, I'll give it a 5. I mean, yeah. I don't know. Is it so bad it's good? Tell me what your thoughts on this scene are. I do like Kate's lines. Kate's lines are the best bit in it. They always get laughs and I have no idea why. But this scene is just so out of character with the rest of the opera. It sticks out like a sore thumb to me. So, my mysterious bride is no other than this winsome Elsie. By my hand, 'tis no ill plunge in fortune's lucky bag. I might have fared worse with my eyes open. But she comes. Now to test her principles. 'Tis not every husband who has a chance of wooing his own wife. Mistress Elsie?
Master Leonard?
So, thou leavest us tonight?
Yes, Master Leonard, I have been kindly tended. I almost fear I am loath to go.
And this Fairfax, wast thou glad when he escaped?
Why, truly, Master Leonard, it is a sad thing that a young and gallant gentleman should die in the very fullness of his life.
Then when thou didst faint in my arms, it was for joy at his safety.
It may be so. I was highly wrought, Master Leonard, and I am but a girl, so when I am highly wrought, I faint.
Now, dost thou know, I am consumed with the parlous jealousy.
Thou? And of whom?
Why, of this Fairfax, surely.
Of Colonel Fairfax?
Aye. Shall I be frank with thee, Elsie? I love thee, ardently, passionately. Elsie, I have loved thee these 2 days, which is a long time, and I would fain join my life to thine.
Master Leonard, thou art jesting.
Jesting? May I shrivel into raisins if I jest. I love thee with a love that is a fever, with a love that is a frenzy, with a love that eateth up my heart. What sayest thou? Thou wilt not let my heart be eaten up?
Oh, mercy, what am I to say?
Dost thou love me, or hast thou been insensible these 2 days?
I love all brave men.
Nay, there is love in excess. I thank heaven there are many brave men in England, but if thou lovest them all, I withdraw my thanks.
I love the bravest best, but... Sir, I may not listen. I am not free. I am a wife.
Thou? A wife? Whose? His name. His hours are numbered. Nay, his grave is dug and his epitaph set up. Come, his name.
Oh, sir, keep my secret. It is the only barrier that fate could set up between us. My husband is none other than Colonel Fairfax.
The greatest villain unhung, the most ill-favoured, ill-mannered, ill-natured, ill-omened, ill-tempered dog in Christendom.
It is very like. He is naught to me, for I never saw him. I was blindfolded, and he was to have died within the hour, and he did not die, and I am wedded to him, and my heart is broken. He was to have died, and he did not die. The scoundrel, the perjured, traitorous villain. Thou should have insisted on his dying first, to make sure. 'Tis the only way with these Fairfaxes. I now wish I had. Bloodthirsty little maiden. A fig for this Fairfax. Be mine. He shall never know. He dares not show himself, and if he dare, what art thou to him? Fly with me, Elsie. We will be married tomorrow, and thou shalt be the happiest wife in England. Master Leonard, I am amazed. Is it thus that brave soldiers speak to poor girls? Oh, for shame, for shame! I am wed, not the less because I love not my husband. I am a wife, sir, and I have a duty, and, oh, sir, thy words terrify me. They are not honest. They are wicked, wicked words, and unworthy thy great and brave heart. Oh, shame upon thee, shame upon thee! Nay, Elsie, I did but jest. I spake but to try thee. Bang.
So this, to this day, remains one of my favourite dialogues to use in auditions. I really, really do like this dialogue a lot. But as I alluded to in my last little bit, I do think this would have had more impact if we'd already seen them interacting a little bit. We see that she faints in his arms, but presumably she doesn't remember that. I mean, how would she remember whose arms she'd fainted into? Perhaps directors could manage to get round this somehow by maybe showing them interact a little bit in Act 2, or if there's like a musical interlude into Act 2, maybe they can be doing something together. But yeah, it seems to me like the Yeomen of the Guard needed to just be 3 acts long, and we needed to see this earlier on in the act. We needed to see them fall in love, much like we miss out on Hilarion and Ida falling in love in Princess Ida. This is like something that we need to see, because it means that Fairfax often comes across to people as like not very nice, like a cad. People aren't terribly sympathetic to him, but as far as we know, Leonard and Elsie have actually got this amazing chemistry and these sparkling conversations, and they're able to kind of joke around with each other a little bit. And so when he says, "Oh, I'll test her principles," perhaps it's because that's their established relationship. Perhaps he feels like he can tease her a bit, and it does certainly seem that way, the way she responds to his you should have insisted on him dying first to make sure, and I wish I had. There's definitely a jokey relationship they've got there. She seems to speak to him quite easily and honestly. And when she says, "Oh, sir, keep my secret," it's the only barrier that fate could set up between us. Like, she is ready to marry this guy. They've pretty much admitted their feelings for each other. So it's just a shame that we miss this, because it means that the actors then have to do all of the work to try and show the audience that, oh no, we've like already fallen instantly in love and developed this really instant chemistry. And good on Elsie for standing up for herself at the end there. What a cracking line. And I love it when Elsie's say, "Sir, I am amazed." And then people don't know what she's going to say next. Maybe she's going to go, "Yeah, let's run off together." "Sir, I am amazed. Is it thus that brave soldiers speak to poor girls?" Wow. That is so brave. It's really brave of her to stand up and say that to somebody. This is like an important guy. He's the son of the head Tower Warder, or, is apparently the son of the head Tower Warder. And she is standing up and saying this to him. Like, she is such a streetwise person. Like, Elsie really knows her worth and her value, and she has a big spine. A big spine? Could you say that? I certainly wouldn't have stood up for somebody like this. It's immensely cathartic to get to actually play this part and say these lines. And I love that line. It may be so. I was highly wrought, Master Leonard, and I am but a girl, so when I am highly wrought, I faint. And I love how she is making use of this silly stereotype that women are just all weak and emotional and faint all the time. And she is making use of that to kind of try and get herself out of a situation, which I find really, really clever and really funny. It's so lovely how it would be quite an anti-feminist joke, but because she is using it in the way she is, it actually has the reverse effect, and it actually comes across as really clever and funny. And so I very much appreciate that joke from Elsie. Poetry wise, I think it's actually quite pretty. I'm going to give it an 8 for poetry, most of all for Elsie's speech at the end there. Comedy, I find this scene really, really funny, like that highly wrought bit. May I shrivel into raisins if I jest. It's good. I'm going to give this, I'll give it a 9 for comedy. And then character. I think this is an opportunity for actors, and I'm not going to give it a 10. I'm going to give it a 9 though. I do think it works really, really well. I just wish there had been more of it before. I wish this had been their second dialogue scene and they'd maybe had one a few scenes ago. If there'd been like another scene at the start of Act 2, I don't know. I think that Yeomen has such a good story, but this is not enough time to tell it in. So it means a lot of this dialogue is just rushed and seems shoehorned in. And it's a shame because there's such good material in there. It's just a little bit muddled in my opinion. Narrative, I'd say it's mostly just characters talking the narrative. I'll give it a 7 for that. I do think it upholds the story quite well. Emotional dramatic impact, yeah, I'm going to give this a 9 as well. Not quite a 10. But I do think that, especially Elsie's speech at the end there is great. You learn that these two characters really do have a lot of affection for each other. And this just remains one of my favourite scenes in the canon, certainly as an actor to read. And I hope to actually play Elsie again one day so that I can do this for realsies.
Nay, sweetheart, be comforted. This Fairfax was but a pestilent fellow, and, as he had to die, he might as well die thus than any other way. 'Twas a good death. Still, he was my husband, and had he not been, he was nevertheless a living man, and now he is dead. And so, by your leave, my tears may flow unchidden, Master Point.
And didst thou see all this?
Aye, with both eyes at once. This and that. The testimony of one eye is not, he may lie, but when it is corroborated by the other, it is good evidence that none may gainsay. Here are both present in court, ready to swear to him.
But art thou sure it was Colonel Fairfax? Saw you his face?
Aye, and a plaguey, ill-favoured face it was too. A very hang-dog face. A felon face, a face to fright the headsman himself and make him strike awry. Oh, a plaguey, bad face, take my word for it. How they laugh! 'Tis ever thus with simple folk. An accepted wit has but to say, pass the mustard, and they roar their ribs out. If I ever come to life again, thou shalt pay for this, Master Point. Now, Elsie, thou art free to choose again. So behold me. I am young and well-favoured. I have a pretty wit. I can jest you, jibe you, quip you, crank you, rack you, riddle you. Tush, man! Thou know'st not how to woo. 'Tis not to be done with time-worn jests and threadbare sophistries, with quips, conundrums, rhymes and paradoxes. 'Tis an art in itself, and must be studied gravely and conscientiously. Now listen to me. 'Tis done thus. Mistress Elsie, there is one here who, as thou knowest, loveth thee right well. That he does, right well. He is but a man of poor estate, but he hath a loving, honest heart. He'll be a true and trusty husband to thee, and if thou wilt be his wife, thou shalt lie curled up in his heart, like a little squirrel in its nest. 'Tis a pretty figure. A maggot in a nut lies closer, but a squirrel will do. He knoweth that thou wast a wife, an unloved and unloving wife, and his poor heart was near to breaking. But now that thine unloving husband is dead, and thou art free, he would fain pray that thou wouldst hearken unto him, and give him hope that thou wouldst one day be his. He presses her hands, and he whispers in her ear. Odds buddikins, what does it mean? Now, sweetheart, wilt thou be this poor good fellow's wife? If the good, brave man, is he a brave man? So men say.
That's not true, but let it pass.
If the brave man will be content with a poor, penniless, untaught maid. Widow, but
let that pass.
I will be his true and loving wife, and that with my heart of hearts. My own dear love. Why, what's all this, brother? Brother, it is not seemly.
Oh, I can't let that pass. Hold enough, Master Leonard. An advocate should have his fee, but methinks thou art overpaying thyself.
Nay, that is for Elsie to say. I promised thee I would show thee how to woo, and herein lies the proof of the virtue of my teaching. Go thou, and apply it elsewhere.
So this is a scene that, honestly, it can be played to make Fairfax out to be an absolute turd and Jack Point out to be just this poor guy who has been kind of cheated out of the love of his life. But it can also be to have turned around, and it can be made to see like Jack Point is just completely not worthy of Elsie at all. The answer isn't in the text itself, because as I say, the text can be used to show almost anything. What's so interesting about this is that some people, just because they can't always express themselves and express how they feel about a person or a situation, it doesn't mean that what they feel for that person isn't real. So when Jack Point says, oh, behold me, you can have me, but then he can't, it's too intense for him. He can't communicate that way. So instead he goes, I'll jibe you, crank you, rack you, riddle you, and it's like, oh no, Jack, but why? And if we were being unkind, we might say, oh, well, he doesn't really love her. But if we're being kind, which I like to be, I say he's just really inept at making his feelings known. And that's the real tragedy. The tragedy is that if he just managed to express himself like he does in the Act 2 finale, right back at the start, then this may not have happened. She may never have met Leonard/Fairfax. And I know a lot of people will say that the text supports Elsie not having any feelings for Jack Point at all. But in fact, the text supports either, because it's never clear in the text that she doesn't love him. When I directed it back in 2021, I played it as if Elsie is actually really fond of Jack Point, but it's just they have this very brother-sister kind of relationship. And in fact, if he'd come out and said it earlier, it may have worked out for them. And they've obviously joked about it because it is brought up where Elsie can hear about it. Oh, you man and wife? Oh, no, we're not man and wife. But there's no reason why maybe Elsie might actually really fancy him, but thinks that he doesn't fancy her because he's not come out and said it. You know, maybe she's waiting for him to make the first move and then he just never really does. And then it's only when it's too late that it transpires that, oh, actually, he really did have quite heavy, intense feelings for her, but that's never expressed. But I would say here that there really isn't an interpretation of Fairfax that makes him completely free from blame in this. I'm not saying he's a terrible person. Everyone's got their flaws, but it's just the line, observe, it's done thus, or whatever that line is. And then he goes over to Elsie. I don't like how that reads. I don't think there's a reading of that line that's not kind of pickup artisty, if that makes sense. And it's the fact that however he feels about Elsie, as far as we know, Fairfax has fallen in love with Elsie after 2 days. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't, but it seems like it's more of a game to him. So what I find so bizarre is that people on Facebook or kind of any kind of GNS online groups have such strong opinions about Jack Point and Elsie and what their exact feelings for each other are, but it's actually so vague. It's so vague. What Fairfax feels for Elsie, what Elsie feels for Fairfax, what Elsie feels for Jack Point, what Jack Point feels for Elsie until the end. It's so utterly vague. And I think that's great because it means that every production you see of it will be totally different. I think what I don't like is when people decide that their version of it is correct. You can definitely, I mean, I think my version of it is the best, but I'm not saying my version is the only one that's correct because the text actually supports any kind of version of this. But yeah, the way that Fairfax implies that you can get any girl if you do what I'm doing here is a bit icky to me. And I don't know if there's a way of playing that to make that not seem icky. Let me know in the comments if you've seen a Fairfax doing that who can actually do this whole scene without it seeming a bit icky. I think I would say if you want to be a nice Fairfax, your one goal is to convince the audience that you really are very much in love with Elsie and really respect her. And that's hard with those lines, with that, it's done thus. There's something funny about that line. So however nice Fairfax is meant to be, I maintain that that line is a bit dodge. Phoebe doesn't really do too much in this scene. Odds bodikins, what can it mean? She is very unobservant, is Phoebe, isn't she? And then when Jack Point finds out about it, because he's just been very naive about this as well. And Elsie, I wonder what she's feeling. I like to think that Elsie only truly gives up on Jack Point when he says that, "I'll wreck you, riddle you," etc., etc. And actually, she was listening to him before that. And yeah, she was irritated when he was trying to cheer her up earlier, but that's just because he's a bit awkward. He can be a bit socially awkward, or maybe he's nasty. You can play Jack Point like a kind of self-indulgent, whiny, nice guy. You can play him that way. I just don't quite know what you'd be saying by doing that, and like if that's worth it, you know? Poetry. I do like the imagery here. Squirrel in its nest, maggot in a nut lies closer. The contrast between Fairfax's language and Jack Point's language, I think that's really cool. I'm going to give that an 8 for poetry. This opera has actually been really good for poetry. I think that the poetry in this show is actually significantly better than a lot of other aspects of it. There's also been scenes that I found really funny in it, but I do notice the comedy scores are lower than they are in most of these operas. Comedy, I don't find as particularly funny at all, but the whole thing with a maggot and a nut lies closer, but like, he's not really brave, but we'll let that pass. It's kind of, even though you know, oh god, the horrible thing is coming, it's still kind of gently funny, so I'm going to give that a 5 for comedy. Character, yeah, I think this one is really strong for character, apart from just it not being particularly clear what people's feelings are for each other. Like that's not obvious by the text. I do think it's like relatively decent for maintaining people's characters, so I'm going to give that a 7. Narrative. Yeah, there's a lot happening in this scene. The relationships between these characters are finally being established. It's finally out in the open that Elsie and Leonard want to get married. So I will give it kind of quite a high mark for that. I'll give that an 8 for narrative. An emotional, dramatic impact. You know what? I'm only going to give this an 8, even though this is the scene where Jack Point ostensibly gets his heart broken. I actually don't find it as emotional as the scene before it, or as emotional as the scene with Jack Point and Wilfred. I think that's where the real emotional heart of it is for me, dialogue-wise. Obviously, when he comes in at the end, that's the whole other story.
And I helped that man to escape. And I've kept a secret and pretended I was his dearly loving sister and did everything I could think of to make folk believe I was his dearly loving sister, and this is his gratitude. Before I pretend to be sister to anybody again, I'll turn nun and be sister to everybody, one as much as another.
In tears, eh? What a plague art thou grizzling for now?
Why am I grizzling? Thou hast often wept for jealousy. Well, 'tis for jealousy I weep now. Aye, yellow bilious jaundiced jealousy. So make the most of that, Master Wilfred.
But I have never given thee cause for jealousy. The lieutenant's cook may deny but the merest gossips.
Jealous of thee? Bah! I'm jealous of no craven cock on the hill who crows about what he'd do when he dead. I'm jealous of another and a better man than now. Set that down, Master Wilfred. And he is to marry Elsie Maynard, the pale little fool. Set that down, Master Wilfred. My heart is well nigh broken. There, thou hast it all. Make the most of it.
The man thou lovest is to marry Elsie Maynard? Why, that is no other than thy brother, Leonard Merrill.
Oh, mercy, what have I said?
Why, what manner of brother is this? Thou lying little jade, speak! Who is this man whom thou hast called brother, and fondled, and coddled, and kissed, with my connivance, oh Lord, with my connivance? Ha! Should it be this Fairfax? It is! It is! This accursed Fairfax! It's Fairfax! Fairfax, whom thou hast just shot through the head, and who lies at the bottom of the river. I may have been mistaken. We are but fallible mortals, the best of us. But I'll make sure. I'll make sure.
Stay. One word. I think it cannot be this Fairfax. Mind I say, I think, because thou hast just slain Fairfax. But whether he be Fairfax or no Fairfax, he is to marry Elsie, and as thou hast shot him through the head, and he is dead, be content with that, and I will be thy wife.
Is that sure?
Aye, sure enough, for there's no help for it. Thou art a very brute. But even brutes must marry, I suppose.
My beloved! Phoebe, rejoice, for I bring glad tidings. Colonel Fairfax's reprieve was signed 2 days since, but it was foully and maliciously kept back by Secretary Poltwhistle, who designed that it should arrive after the colonel's death. It hath just come to hand, and it is now in the lieutenant's possession.
Then the colonel is free? Oh, kiss me, my dear. Kiss me again and again.
Odds, death of my life! Art thou mad? Am I mad? Are we all mad?
Oh, my dear, I am well nigh crazed with joy.
Come, away from him, thou hussy, thou jade, thou kissing, clinging cockatrice. And as for thee, sir, devil take thee. I'll rip thee like a herring for this. I'll skin thee for it. I'll cleave thee to the chine. Oh, Phoebe, who is this man?
Peace, fool. He is my brother.
Another brother? Are there any more of them? Produce them all at once and let me know the worst.
This is the real Leonard Dolt. The other was but his substitute. The real Leonard, I say, my father's own son.
How do I know this? Has he brother writ large upon his brow? I mistrust thy brothers. Thou art but a false jade.
Now, Wilfred, be just. Truly I did deceive thee before, but it was to save a precious life, and to save it not for me, but for another. They are to be wed this very day. Is not this enough for thee? Come, I am thy Phoebe, thy very own, and we will be wed in a year, or 2, or 3 at the most. Is that not enough for thee?
Okay, so I've actually made a decision to include this as a separate scene, this Phoebe Wilfred final dialogue, because I do think it rounds off their story nicely, and I happen to really love this portion of the dialogue, but I would say after this dialogue does tend to go off the rails slightly, and I'd really like this dialogue to stand on its own because I want to give it the best chance of doing well in these rankings. I absolutely love this scene. Getting to play this as Phoebe back in 2013. This is probably my favourite part of the show. I loved this scene. I helped that man to escape, and I'll turn nun and be sister to everybody. And that bit, set that down, Master Wilfred. Oh my goodness, I got such joy out of doing those lines. But I have never given me cause for jealousy. It is such a fun scene. For a person who doesn't seem to be in love with her partner, you know, if Wilfred can be considered Phoebe's partner at this point, at least he's her scene partner for the most part. For a person that doesn't seem to love her scene partner, the way they communicate is so open and honest. I honestly think they're going to have a really great relationship. When I think about what's going to happen to characters after the ends of the operas, I really want to know what happens to Phoebe and Wilfred. I'm interested in their life afterwards. There's a bit of me that I feel like if I was going to write a Gilbert and Sullivan fan fiction, it would probably be Phoebe and Wilfred's like talking about getting married and like just kind of their like various relationship foibles and hilarities. I think they'd make a really nice couple, and it's just worked out in this wonderful way. And the fact that they play off of each other as well, like, oh, it is Fairfax as for who that was just shot in her head and who lies at the bottom of the river. It's just so good. And she's so quick, like, I'll be thy wife, I'll do it. And I like to think that she's actually relatively happy with how this worked out. She wasn't going to get Fairfax anyway. That dream has gone out of the window. And I don't think it was ever real anyway. It was a teenage crush. He was all wrong for her. And I think that she would have realised that eventually. Maybe part of the reason she had a crush on Fairfax was because he was going to die. You know, it's quite a safe person to have a crush on, because she can then just immortalise him as this perfect person for the rest of her life if he died. But she'd soon have realised, you know, actually, I'm not really interested in a person like that. Because she gets on so well with Wilfred. They challenge each other. Oh, it's so sweet. Because she never speaks to Fairfax like she speaks to Wilfred. She has a wonderful relationship with Wilfred. And I personally ship them massively. And I don't think it's going to be unhappy at all. So yeah, let's talk about the scores for this scene. So yeah, poetry. I think this is great. I love the bit about nun, turning nun and being sister to everybody, and the set that down, Master Wilfred bit. And I just think it's very beautifully constructed. I'm going to give that a 9 out of 10. And comedy, this is one of my favourite bits, especially the I have never given thee cause for jealousy. And then the whole thing coming out, but she's to marry thy brother, Leonard Merrill. Oh mercy, what have I said? and their whole back and forth where it's revealed that actually it's Fairfax, I think is great. I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10 for comedy. And character as well. What vivid characters these are. How oblivious Wilfred is when he thinks that Phoebe's crying because of her. And he's assuring her, no, it's okay. The cook may deny it, but the merest gossips. Because as we've alluded to earlier on, it could be that Wilfred's actually like super popular with the ladies, and Phoebe's the only one that doesn't like him. She's like, oh, I'm just like pretending not to like him. Maybe Wilfred's like really kind of cool and hot, and everyone likes him apart from Phoebe. I'm going to give this a 10 for character. I think it's so good. Narrative, I mean, again, it's mostly characters talking. I wouldn't say there's really too much story happening, but she does stop him from blowing the whole thing wide open. So I'm going to give that an 8. An emotional dramatic impact. So how affected is Phoebe by this scenario? I think that after When a Wooer Goes a Wooing, I do think the transition from that into comedy is perfect, because I know the line about the nun is funny, but I do think the first laugh is, but I have never given thee cause for jealousy. That's probably the first laugh afterwards, and we've transitioned into that so nicely. And Wilfred, he does this a lot. Wilfred breaks us out of tense moments so often in such a wonderful, wholesome way. So I'm going to go and give this an 8 for emotional dramatic impact as well. What a great scene. What a lovely wrapping up of their relationship. So as a slight edit, I accidentally forgot that the scene kind of between Phoebe and Wilfred continues after Leonard enters. I think the true ending to this scene is actually where Meryl enters, because that's the wrapping up of their relationship. So even though I don't think my scores are going to change, I think that I think if anything there are even more funny lines in this bit. Another brother. Also, just the idea of Leonard just bursting on Phoebe Rejoice. It's like, oh, hi. Haven't seen you for a few days. How are you? It's Phoebe Rejoice. So there's so much good stuff going on here. I'm not going to change the poetry score, but I think I actually will give it one extra mark for narrative, because we're actually learning quite a lot. Like, we're learning that Fairfax actually he did get his reprieve in the end, but then the whole another brother, and then Phoebe comforting Wilfred afterwards. To me, this is the bit that really shows that she's not too disappointed about this state of affairs, and at least she can now be in a relationship with somebody who she can control a bit in a nice way. I don't mean in in a horrible abusive controlling way, but she has power when maybe a lot of women wouldn't have had power in relationships those days. But Wilfred really loves her, and that's nice. So even if she doesn't quite feel the same way yet, I do think that she's recognising this is going to be a really lovely thing for her. Really, really great scene with Phoebe and Wilfred. Perfect way of wrapping up their relationship. I think it is right to split this final last scene into two, and this is definitely the right place to split it. Just before Meryl comes on. And now Meryl is about to come on.
Phoebe, hast thou heard the brave news?
Aye, father.
I'm mad with joy. Why, what's all this?
Oh, father. He discovered our secret through my folly, and the price of his silence is Phoebe's heart.
Oh dear, no. Phoebe's hand.
It's the same thing.
Is it?
'Tis pity. But the Colonel had to be saved at any cost, and as thy folly revealed our secret, thy folly must e'en suffer for it. Dame Carruthers.
So, this is a plot to shield this arch-fiend, and I have detected it. A word from me, and 3 heads besides his would roll from their shoulders.
Nay, Colonel Fairfax is reprieved. Yet, if my complicity in his escape were known, plague on the old meddler. There's nothing for it. Hush! Pretty one. Such bloodthirsty words ill become those cherry lips. Sergeant Merrill! Why, look'ee, Chuck. For many a month I've thought to myself, there's snug love saving up in that middle-aged bosom for someone, and why not for thee? That's me. So take heart and tell her, that's thee, that thou, that's me, lovest her, thee, and, well, I'm a miserable old man, and I've done it, and that's me. But not a word about Fairfax. The price of thy silence is Meryl's heart. No, Meryl's hand. It's the same thing. Is it? I'm going to need someone to explain to me exactly why the heart hand is it joke is funny. As far as I understand it, the funniness is because one of them is saying heart, and the other saying, oh no, you've got my hand, not my heart. And the other one goes, it's the same thing. And then they go, is it? Is it? Is it? Like, what is... Like, I think I get the joke. Is the joke just that they're disagreeing about what they've agreed to? Like, is there another level here that I'm not getting? Like, to me, it's just like, it's not funny. So, and it's weird that he does it twice. It's like, oh, that's a motif that's coming back. Oh, that's happened to them. I don't know. I don't like that. I hate how that's the last line of the show. Of course, Yeomen's a little bit different. It doesn't really have a pre-Act 2 finale dialogue because they wrap up the story in the Act 2 finale itself. It's a little bit like the Gondoliers, but I think it does an even better job than the Gondoliers, in fact. I think this is a particularly good Act 2 finale, and so it doesn't really matter that we don't have a big wrapping up scene. It's fine that it's just two people. I slightly prefer this to the pre-Strange Adventure scene because at least it's been established that she loves him, and it's quite funny that he's like, she messed up and now she has to marry him, Dame Carruthers, that's classic slapstick. So that is quite funny. So I am gonna give this a 7 for comedy. I do think that is quite funny. I don't like the again allusions to how, oh god, it's gonna be so bad to marry her because she's so unpleasant. I don't know, it's just, are people in real life really that unpleasant to each other? And like, why would she like him if he was just, because it doesn't even seem like he's being polite to her, he just like outwardly doesn't like her, so why would she like someone? I have no idea. It's very, very odd. So yeah, 7 for comedy. Poetry doesn't do particularly well in this scene. I'm only going to give it a 5 because that is it that comes back again. It sounds like it's meant to be something clever, and I just don't like. Yeah, the thing is, I feel like I understand the confusion between heart and hand. I think I'm just not getting why they're saying is it and why that's meant to be funny. It's the same thing, is it? I don't really quite understand what's funny about it or why everyone ever laughs at that. Character, I mean, Merrill and Carruthers don't really have much character, so I'm going to give it a 5. I don't really see what's happening here. And narrative, I mean, the story's ended, really. I mean, you didn't even need to have this thing with Merrill and Carruthers in there. It seems so shoehorned in. I don't really understand it at all. So I'm going to give it a 5 for narrative as well, honestly. Emotional dramatic impact. I guess it's quite funny to see him being a bit anxious about it, so I'm going to give that a 6. I do think there is something in that. But yeah, this isn't really the best scene. But so it looks like we have quite a variety here. There's really quite a variety of numbers. So let's add up these scores and see which ones have done well. So the scores have been tabulated. I had a few ties. I had a 4-way tie actually, but I just kind of broke them myself. I just followed my heart, and these are the results that I came out with. So in 19th place we have the pre-Strange Adventure scene. No surprises there. In 18th place we have the scene between Fairfax and the Lieutenant. Was that really that bad? I think it was because we were tired of narrative at that point. Interestingly, I don't really remember not enjoying that scene, but maybe I was just getting narrative fatigue. Interesting. Maybe I disagree with that. In 17th place, there comes the second scene between Fairfax and Merrill, just before the Act 1 finale. It's so short, that's probably why it came so low. In 16th place, we have the pre-Act 2 finale scene between Merrill and Carruthers, and also kind of Phoebe and Wilfred as well, just going off at the end there. Number 15, we have Phoebe / Merrill / Leonard. I think this is actually a pretty good scene. I just don't think it's as good as the song that follows it. That's where the real meat of the scene seems to be. In 14th place, we have Carruthers and Phoebe. There's some nice poetry in that scene, but Carruthers isn't really too vivid as a character. That's probably where that one suffers. In 13th place, we have Phoebe and Merrill, another scene that occurs quite near the start. Phoebe has a lot of scenes in a row with a lot of different characters, and this one is, I think, slightly more interesting than the one with Carruthers, but not hugely more interesting. Now on to the 4-way tie, which I have broken myself. So in 12th place, we have Point and Elsie. This is the scene just after Here's a Man of Jollity. It's a fair enough scene. Stuff is happening, but it's not one that's hugely emotionally or dramatically interesting. Number 11, I actually gave to Wilfred's little monologue. I know it's short, but it's so full of character, so very charming and so very funny. In 10th place, I gave that to the Point Elsie Lieutenant scene just before "How say you maid and will you wed?" I think that's a really lovely scene. It gives all the actors a real chance to get into their characters, to be funny, and to give us lots of story at the same time. In 9th place, we have Phoebe, Point, Elsie, and Fairfax. This is the scene that goes before "A man who would woo a fair maid," and when a wooer goes a wooing. I do really like this scene. There's a lot of emotion in it, but because there's 4 characters, it's a little bit more disjointed, and I think it's not altogether clear what the characters' intentions are. It's very open to interpretation, but perhaps that's a good thing. In 8th place, we have Fairfax's monologue. I know it's so short. Isn't it funny that it came above that scene before it? But I actually think that it deserves its place here. I think it's a really beautiful monologue. Very introspective, very gorgeous language, funny and clever, as one would expect from such a fellow as Fairfax. In 7th place, we have the scene between Fairfax and Meryl, quite near the start of the show. This is where Fairfax really introduces himself and really shows us who he is. And I think he does so beautifully with that language of "it's easier to die well than to live well, forsooth I have tried both." He's such a great character, such an interesting guy, and this is just a perfect example of that, the perfect introduction to him. In 6th place, we have the scene between Point and the Lieutenant. I read this one with Will in New York. I love this scene. It gives the Lieutenant a chance to be funny, and it gives the actor playing Point a chance to be really creative, really quite physical. It's another scene that can be played loads of different ways. It just gives the actors a big chance to experiment and have a lot of fun. In 5th place, I have the scene between Phoebe and Wilfred, just after Phoebe's first song. I don't think it's as emotionally interesting as their other scenes, but it imparts lots of narrative. It really sets up their characters extremely well, and it's a scene that I have lots of really great memories of. In 4th place, we have the Fairfax Elsie scene, which is one of my favourite scenes to do at auditions, or just generally if I'm reading with a friend. It's a lovely scene to do. Lots of great things about this. No problems here. Bang! That's how the scene ends. In 3rd place, we have the second Phoebe and Wilfred scene, which is the one before "Were I Thy Bride?" I think where the previous one suffered in not being as emotionally interesting, this one is maybe just quite a little bit more difficult to play as an actor, but I do think it's hilarious. It's a really, really funny scene. There's lots of stuff going on, lots of tension in the air. This is a big opportunity for both actors to have a lot of fun, and for that it makes a really great scene. And in 2nd place, we have the 3rd Phoebe and Wilfred scene. So the one at the end of the opera that I decided to separate from the Dame Carruthers and Meryl scene. And I'm really glad I separated it, because this truly is the absolute culmination of these two's relationships. They get 3 whole scenes together, and they contrast each other so well. And the first one, Phoebe's indifferent to Wilfred and he's all over her, and the second one, she's all over him and he's a bit confused by it. And then in the 3rd scene, they really come to blows with each other. They're kind of at each other's throats just ever so slightly, and really everything is out on display. They're both really vulnerable, but it's also absolutely hilariously funny. So really, really great scene. However, in 1st place, we have the scene between Jack Point and Wilfred, which I thought was probably going to come 1st place. It really does have absolutely everything. I think I doctored a single point for comedy, because I just thought the ones with Phoebe and Wilfred were just a little bit more laugh out loud funny. But this has got comedy, it's got beautiful poetry, it showcases both characters so well, so much opportunity for the actors to play around and have a lot of fun. In the ENO production for Yeomen of the Guard, this was definitely my favourite section of the show. I loved the guy playing Wilfred. I thought he was absolutely amazing. I thought the guy playing Jack Point also did a really, really good job. Emotional, dramatic impact. The scene is just off the scale. It's just so truthful, and it's about something which people might not know about. I mean, how it feels like to be a working performer and go through these bouts of depression. It's like right now I am about to just completely crash. It takes so much energy to do these videos when I'm not feeling too good, and I've got a headache, but it's like all around my face, and that the mask of my face is hurting. And all day I've just had to say hello there to customers coming in, and I'm just out of energy. It's been a tough old time for Rachel G&S Middle. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm just asking you to subscribe to the channel. If you want to see me smile again, please subscribe to the channel. Well, that's weird. I don't like that. Don't like that at all.